Hey guys, tonight we walk straight into a medieval English winter, the kind that squeezes the breath right out of your lungs the moment you step outdoors, the sky low and heavy with cloud, the air smelling faintly of damp wood smoke and frozen mud. You pull your collar up instinctively, even though you're only imagining the cold from the comfort of a modern chair, and picture your boots crunching across rutted village lanes glazed with frost. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barks, then thinks better of it and goes quiet again. Windows glow weakly behind shutter slats, each light a promise of heat that never seems as warm once you reach it. And yes, here comes the reality check. You probably won't survive this if dropped back here without your central heating, insulation, and electric blanket. Most of us wouldn't last more than a handful of nights before fatigue and misery set in hard. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, I'd love for you to comment your location and the local time. Are you listening under tropical humidity or winter snowflakes right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand as a traveler, arriving at the fringe of a small English village sometime around the 13th century. It's late evening in January. The sun has given up early, vanishing before you felt ready to let go of its weak dye of warmth. You're wrapped in wool that smells faintly of sheep and hearth ash. It helps against the wind, but does little for the heavy, damp cold that seeps from the frozen ground and slips straight through your boots. The cold here isn't the dramatic, needle-sharp bite of alpine heights. It's quieter, sneakier. It works its way inward over hours, not minutes, until your fingers ache, your nose runs without noticing, and your teeth chatter even when you will them to stop. In this time, most homes depend on a single open hearth for all heat. That's the mainstream reality historians agree on. One fire in the center of the main room, sometimes offset toward a wall if the building has been updated, but almost never more than that. The fire burns wood, peat, or charcoal. When charcoal is available, each fuel producing different heat and different smells, though none quite enough to make the air truly warm once you step more than a few paces away. The smoke drifts upward toward a hole in the thatch roof or snakes out through shutters left slightly cracked. Chimneys exist in wealthier houses by the late medieval period, but here, smoke still curls lazily inside like an uninvited guest that refuses to leave. Your fingers hover nearer to the flames, feeling that intense, uneven warmth almost painfully hot on the palms while your back remains stiff with cold. If you rotate slowly like a rotisserie chicken before dinner, you might manage to warm one side at a time. That's not even a joke. People really did physically rotate to heat themselves? It's the medieval equivalent of trying to warm yourself with a desk lamp. Villagers shuffle in out of the evening. A woman with a basket of turnips stomps her feet near the door. A man rubs his hands together as if trying to start a small personal fire through friction alone. Children sit very close to the hearth, dangerously so, until sharp parental scolding pushes them backward again into the chill. The fire is a communal anchor. Everything revolves around it: cooking, mending, conversation, and eventually, sleeping. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were objectively colder on average than modern ones due to climatic shifts associated with the early phases of the Little Ice Age, or if our perception of their hardship is amplified simply because people lacked modern heating technology. What everyone agrees on is that regardless of exact temperatures, people felt the cold far more intensely because their insulation systems were primitive and their houses incredibly drafty. You notice how the walls themselves seem to breathe. Wattle and daub woven sticks smeared with mud and straw holds out the wind about as well as a thick blanket thrown against a fence. Cracks form as the mud dries and contracts, and icy air slides through unseen channels directly into the living space. Floors are bare earth or thin wooden boards with no insulation beneath, meaning cold climbs straight up from the ground below into your bones. Even standing still makes the chill rise through the soles of your boots like an unwelcome tide slowly reclaiming dry land. A quirky tidbit. Some families believe hanging thick tapestries, spare cloaks, or even dried herb bundles along walls could confuse drafts or block cold spirits from wandering in. Did these actually work? Slightly, maybe, by slowing air currents. But more importantly, they worked psychologically. The sense that you've sealed a wall makes you feel warmer even if the effect is modest. You step deeper into the main hall where the evening routines unfold. Meals are sparse in winter. Bread feels dense and heavy, soup watery but comforting. Ale flows not enough to numb sensation fully, but enough to dull your awareness of how damn cold your feet still feel. People talk in low voices about weather, livestock, rumors of frozen river crossings far to the north. Conversation doesn't drag long. The cold discourages lingering social visits. Movement is economy. When it's time to sleep, there's no dramatic transition from day to rest. No heated bedroom waiting upstairs, no crisp cotton sheets and mattress toppers. The hall where everyone worked all day becomes the sleeping chamber. Straw pallets appear from corners. Bed frames remain minimal or non-existent in poorer homes. You lie close to the floor where the air is coldest, which historians note as one of the least efficient ways to stay warm. You feel the moment your body begins to slow. Daylight gone, fire settling to glowing coals. Your breath still puffs visibly in the dim. You curl closer to your wool cloak lying beneath you, remembering that every inch of exposed floor or wall means cold creeping into your muscles overnight. Around you, others settle as well, coughing softly, whispering prayers, murmuring about tomorrow's tasks even as exhaustion pulls them downward. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet provided sufficient calories to counterbalance winter cold and energy loss, or if chronic mild malnutrition made cold tolerance worse. Tonight, your stomach feels light. You regret skipping seconds of gruel. The fire crackles lower. Children are tucked nearer to adults like bundles of layered laundry. A dog squeezes between legs, instinctively joining the warmth pile, a furry, uninvited space heater. You envy its thick coat more than is reasonable. As you lie down, you realize something unsettling. The cold doesn't end when sleep comes. It simply waits. And tomorrow night, and the night after that, you'll face it again with the same tools humans have used for centuries. Layered fabric, shared air, stubborn endurance, and a quietly impressive ability to adjust expectations downward until mere survival becomes success. You wake in the same dim hall before the sun even hints at returning, your breath forming pale clouds above your lips. Your limbs feel stiff, as though the cold has folded them into unfamiliar angles while you slept. No alarm clocks needed. Your body simply refuses to remain still on the cold earth. You unfold yourself slowly, joints crackling like tiny kindling sticks, and take a moment to absorb the surroundings in clearer daylight. Now you truly see the houses themselves, those humble structures tasked with bunkering entire families against England's longest winter nights. The mainstream historical fact experts agree upon here is simple. Medieval homes are not built with the layered insulation systems we rely on today. Instead, they're constructed using readily available materials, oak frames filled with wattle and daub or packed stone walls topped with thick thatched roofs. These homes are designed first for durability and shelter, not thermal efficiency. You step outside the hall into the pale morning frost. Roofs sag with thatch bound tightly to wooden beams. The thatch layer is actually quite thick, sometimes over a foot deep, which provides modest insulation against overhead cold. Historians still debate just how effective thatch truly was as a heat barrier. Some argue it was surprisingly efficient, trapping air pockets much like modern insulation. Others believe most heat loss occurred at wall level and through drafty openings, meaning the cozy roof mattered far less than people hoped. Walls vary with wealth and region. In smaller villages like the one you walk through, wattle and daub dominates. The woven lattice is smeared with a masking of river clay, cow dung, straw, and lime, then left to dry. Yes, cow dung features in building materials, a quirky tidbit that never quite fails to unsettle modern listeners. Not because anyone enjoys working with it, but because its fibrous structure increases binding strength and its chemical composition helps reduce cracking. But no one here frames walls with winter comfort in mind. The goal is wind resistance above all else. And while the outer surfaces look solid enough, you learn quickly that they breathe constantly. Cold air wriggles through tiny fractures invisible to the naked eye. On stormy days, villagers sometimes stuff spare cloth, hay, or sheepskin strips into interior seams near door frames in an attempt at draft blocking, creating what one medieval household record calls winter packings, a surprisingly poetic term for what is essentially sticking rags in wall holes. Doors themselves are thick slabs of wood hung on iron hinges, yet they sit unevenly against the frame. No rubber seals, no weather stripping. A stiff wind can make candles flicker even when the hearth fire roars. Some villagers rig curtain-like hangings inside doorways, creating an extra thermal buffer air pocket before the main room begins. It's the medieval version of standing behind sliding supermarket doors while automatic airflow blasts your ankles. Windows, if they exist at all, are small and unglazed. Glass remains expensive and fragile through much of the Middle Ages. Instead, openings might be covered with cloth, oiled parchment, thin-horn sheets, or closed off entirely by wooden shutters once darkness falls. This blocks wind, but also traps smoke. You breathe air tinged with soot so often that mild coughing becomes normalized, not necessarily seen as illness, but simply a winter companion. Historians still argue whether smoke-filled air inside medieval homes worsened respiratory health significantly, or whether long-term exposure led to partial adaptation. Regardless, you're acutely aware how the heat barely penetrates beyond a small zone around the hearth before dissipating into the rafters above. Inside one home, you examine the layout. Everything centers around the open fire pit or raised hearthstone. There may be a dividing screen of wood or cloth that loosely separates cooking space from sleeping area, but no separate heated bedrooms like later centuries enjoy. Heat is not room-based, it's proximity-based. Whoever claims the fire-adjacent spots first receives the best warmth reward. A quirky winter trick sometimes entertained by poorer households involves banking embers beneath thick ash overnight. In theory, the ashes insulate the heat, allowing morning coals to be revived rather than restarted from scratch, a major convenience when fresh wood is scarce or damp. In practice, accuracy varies wildly. Some mornings bring glowing coals ready for kindling. Other mornings bring cold disappointment and frantic flint scraping. Your imagination paints how winter households arrange daily movement purely for heat maintenance. People cluster inside narrow heated zones like planets orbiting a small Sunday frame. Cooking pots hang over the flames, doubling chores as heat-close encounters. Repairs happen near the fire where numbed fingers regain temporary dexterity. Any task performed away from this central warmth is rushed, bodily stamina dictated by how long someone can bear the creeping chill. The floor beneath your boots reminds you how little separation exists between interior life and raw earth. Many floors remain packed dirt, lightly covered with rushes or straw that are periodically replaced. These layers offer minimal insulation but absorb moisture, further chilling the interior when damp. Some historians believe straw and rush coverings were partly maintained for thermal value. Others insist they were primarily for cleanliness and waste absorption, with warmth simply a tiny side benefit. A few better homes boast plank floors or elevated sleeping wake platforms, lifting bodies slightly away from the cold earth. That minor elevation mere inches can make an enormous difference to perceived warmth at night. You start to see why bed frames, even crude ones, become treasured possessions. You pass by a wealthier dwelling framed in stone. Thick walls lend thermal mass. The stone absorbs heat from the hearth during the day and releases it slowly overnight, stabilizing interior temperatures somewhat. Yet stone also draws cold fiercely if the fire dies. Without continuous fuel, even these houses become iceboxes after midnight. Historians still debate whether stone or timber homes provided better winter comfort overall. Timber heats quickly but cools fast. Stone warms slowly but holds heat longer. What's certain is that both suffer from major ventilation gaps and minimal insulation compared to modern structures. As you continue walking the village lanes, you realize survival depends less on architecture than on habits. Knowing where to sit, where to sleep, how to block drafts, how to stretch warmth from scant resources. These aren't minor lifestyle quirks, they're survival strategies developed long before written building manuals existed. By the time you drift back into the main hall, fingertips tingling from cold exposure, you've learned a quiet medieval truth. Winter warmth doesn't come from the house, it comes from constant adaptation to its limitations. Your focus drifts back to the hearth, that flickering orange heart of every medieval winter evening. You've already felt how unreliable its warmth can be too hot when you're leaning in, embarrassingly inadequate when you step away, but now you linger near it long enough to truly understand its shortcomings. The mainstream historical fact is simple. The medieval central hearth, whether set in the floor or against a wall, radiates heat inefficiently. Most warmth shoots upward into open rafters or escapes straight through the smoke hole or flue. Very little spreads evenly across the room. That's the science of radiant heat in large, poorly insulated spaces, even if medieval households call it by another name entirely. The fire doesn't carry. You crouch beside it as a pot bubbles gently. Flames lick unevenly around the iron hooks suspended overhead. Ashes scatter beneath your boots. If you lean too close, the heat scorches your cheeks while the hair at your temples curls uncomfortably, but step back just 2 paces and your breath once again fogs the air. The thermal gradient is laughably steep. You begin to understand why most medieval cold management revolves around positioning rather than architecture. Not how warm is the house, but how close you can get to the fire without catching a sleeve. Historians still argue whether medieval households deliberately arranged their sleeping areas to maximize residual warmth from dying coals, or whether body placement evolved more from practical crowding than strategic heat planning. What is certain, people rarely slept out of eyesight of the hearth unless their wealth allowed something better. You glance up at the rafters. Warm air pools near the ceiling, thick with smoke and scent of oak sap, while lower levels where bodies rest remain colder. Simple physics conspires against comfort. Some clever souls attempt to trap heat by hanging fabric trestles from rafters, creating crude ceiling canopies intended to push warm air downward. Results are modest at best. You still feel the heat stubbornly hovering over your head, resolutely uninterested in descending. One quirky tidbit. Household records reference people swinging the smoke, manually fanning thick cloth or wooden paddles near the hearth to redirect air currents. The idea is to coax heat toward sleeping areas while encouraging smoke upward. It's a fully manual HVAC experiment, equal parts desperate ingenuity and theatrical futility. A few technological improvements trickle through history by this period. Wall-mounted fireplaces begin appearing in noble residences and some monasteries. Chimneys improve smoke evacuation, allowing more focused combustion and slightly better radiant heat delivery. But these never fully solve the distribution problem. Without sealed rooms or insulation, most heat still bleeds quickly into open air. You test the warmth by slowly rotating in place, again medieval human spit roast mode engaged. Each half-turn alternates between comfort and chill. There's an odd meditative quality to this repetitive warming. Lean in, warm up, lean out, shiver, repeat. Someone beside you mutters the night's first joke. If you spin fast enough, winter can't catch you. It earns a weary chuckle. The hearth doubles as psychological heat. The sight and sound of flames bring comfort well beyond measurable temperature rays. Hearth light lets tired minds rest, even as bodies remain cold. Scholars studying medieval mental well-being often cite the hearth's emotional importance as equal to its physical role. Warmth here is as symbolic as sensory. Yet the hearth's shortcomings still dominate nightly survival calculus. Firewood isn't always plentiful. Winter depletes stockpiles fast. Some evenings the fire burns smaller than desired enough to cook porridge, but insufficient to offer real comfort. You notice people wearing thick cloaks indoors rather than hanging them by the door. That's a behavioral adaptation when the hearth can't pick up the slack. Historians still argue whether medieval families prioritized fuel saving over nightly comfort or simply lacked resources to intensify fires regardless of desire. Often the choice isn't philosophical, it's logistical. Wood doesn't appear magically. It requires daylight labor, transportation, splitting, drying, everything wintertime hates. Near bedtime, coals are raked together into a soft mound. Small logs are carefully added to ensure slow overnight burning, though rarely does the fire stay livelier than glowing embers by dawn. Some households attempt banking techniques, burying coals beneath thick ash or insulating them within clay-covered pits near the hearth. The goal is to preserve ignition rather than warmth, an important distinction. These preserved embers might spark the next day's fire more quickly, but they contribute almost nothing to sleep-time heating. You crouch near the floor, noticing colder drafts sliding invisibly underneath hanging wall cloths or beneath doors. Smoke creeps at ankle height in stagnant patches. Breathing near the ground grows harsher. It's another reason people prefer raised bedding even slightly off the floor. You'll feel it when you sit instead of stand, the chill quickly soaking into your hips and thighs. A second small tune of humor passes through the hall when someone boasts about inventing toe warming, which involves shoving feet under the family dog's thick flank. The dog tolerates this arrangement with stoic dignity. This might actually work better than most hearth-related tricks, to be honest. Historians still debate whether medieval animals were intentionally used as passive heat reservoirs or whether proximity simply occurred due to space sharing and natural cleanliness. Either way, warm-blooded insulation becomes invaluable. The hall grows quieter, embers dim, smoke thins. The heat bubble shrinks to near nothing. Your body begins its ancient surrender sequence, curling limbs closer to your chest, wrapping cloak edges tighter, minimizing exposed skin. You feel how the cold now becomes something internal, not just air temperature, but muscle contraction, joint stiffness, shallow breathing. Here's the strange part. After long exposure, your discomfort dulls. Your body recalibrates. Modern sleepers rely on precise thermostats. Medieval sleepers rely on nervous system fatigue. Eventually, exhaustion overrides awareness. You stop tracking the cold moment to moment and simply exist within it. The hearth goes dark. The village falls into thick winter silence. And you discover the hearth was never meant to keep you warm all night, only to give you just enough comfort to surrender to sleep. You sink toward what passes for a medieval bed, realizing quickly that the word bed is doing some impressive heavy lifting here. In most households, sleeping furniture is not a plush sanctuary. It's a practical elevation platform meant to keep bodies barely off the freezing floor. The mainstream historical fact is that typical medieval beds consist of wooden frames or simple rope lattices topped with straw-filled sacks or loose sacks of chaff, all tied together with coarse twine. Mattresses, as you imagine them today, are still a distant dream. Comfort is secondary. Distance from cold earth is the goal. You ease yourself onto a rope bed frame and hear it creak like it's voicing a serious complaint about your modern expectations. The ropes are woven tightly in a crisscross pattern, forming a sagging net beneath layered sacks of straw and dried grasses. These sacks smell faintly of hay dust and old fields, reassuring and itchy at the same time. Over months of use, straw compresses flat, forming uneven ridges that reflect exactly where previous sleepers' hips and shoulders have worn channels into it. Historians still argue whether rope beds were considered comfortable by contemporary users or tolerated as a necessary compromise between labor cost and bodily function. Evidence suggests both. Letters from wealthier households complain of stiffness even when feather mattresses existed, while rural diaries rarely acknowledge bedding discomfort at all, either because concerns were minimal or simply accepted as background life noise. In poorer dwellings, rope beds don't exist. Instead, wicker pallets or straw-filled cloth sacks are spread directly on the floor. You try sinking onto one of these and immediately sense the temperature difference. Cold creeps upward into your spine more aggressively when elevation vanishes. The difference of even 6 inches lifts you slightly out of the coldest air layer pooling near the floor, producing a surprisingly measurable heat advantage. A quirky tidbit: medieval rope beds require routine tightening, a process known as to sleep tight. Yes, that phrase likely originates here. Too loose ropes sag so deeply they dump sleepers into uncomfortable knots. Too tight ropes snap. It becomes a mundane chore for household servants or family members, adjusting tension to restore bearable sleep geometry. In wealthier houses, and these feel almost fantastical, by comparison you hear about feather beds layered with goose or duck down. Such bedding is rare and extremely valuable. Feather mattresses require enormous numbers of birds and frequent maintenance to keep from clumping and rotting, possessing one signal status comparable to owning silver tableware or fine carpets. You don't encounter one personally tonight, but villagers gossip about lords who sleep like fledglings in nests of gold. Even straw beds, however, serve winter functions beyond simple cushioning. Straw traps air within its hollow stem's primitive insulation by default. The compressed mass beneath you retains heat generated by your body as the night progresses, eventually forming a small warmth pool around your hips and spine. It's not comfort, it's micro-survival. You crawl beneath layers of bedding. Linen sheets touch your skin first. Cool, crisp, slightly damp. Over them lies coarse wool blankets that itch against wrists and ankles but trap precious warmth more effectively than linen alone. Fur pelts sit at the top in wealthier homes or where hunting yields surplus. The fur doesn't just insulate, it forms uneven air pockets, further slowing heat escape. Modern sleeping bags work by the same principle, only without fleas, lice, or velvet scratches across your chin. Yes, parasites are the uninvited bedfellows of medieval sleep. Fleas particularly thrive in straw bedding, leading to frequent scratching rituals before slumber. People shake out bedding daily to reduce infestations, though winter cold reduces flea activity slightly, a small seasonal mercy. Some wear nightcaps not only for warmth but also to protect hair from parasitic stowaways. A garment meets biology, meets peace of mind, survival. Historians still argue whether parasite discomfort seriously impacted medieval sleep quality or if the far harsher fatigue of daily labor rendered itching irrelevant compared to sheer exhaustion. You shift your body to nestle deeper within blanket folds. You notice how sleeping is active rather than passive. You tuck corners strategically around your shoulders, wedge the blanket beneath your chin, fold your knees tightly inward. The sleeping posture tends toward curled positions resembling fetal shapes, minimizing exposed surface area. Full body sprawl would rapidly drain heat. Comfort yields to thermodynamic necessity. Another joking moment drifts through the hall when someone brags about mastering the hog knot, wrapping blankets so tightly that exiting bed requires the agility of an uncoiling sausage. Laughter muffles beneath wool layers. Multiple sleepers often share a single bed. Not out of sighing romance alone, but because 2 or 3 bodies generate combined warmth impossible to replicate with bedding alone. Beds stuffed with children, elderly relatives, servants, and guests become heat huddles more than sleeping arrangements. This arrangement isn't always restful limbs tangle. Snoring erupts, but warmth outweighs elbow discomfort every time. Historians still debate how normalized communal bed sharing truly was and whether privacy concerns existed in the modern sense. Evidence suggests that while modesty standards varied by class and religious influence, warmth needs nearly always overrode personal space ideals. Your bed frame creaks as the hall quiets. You hear soft breathing around you, occasional coughs, fabric rustling as someone adjusts an elbow into a fleece warmer position. The air cools steadily, but within your layered nest, heat stabilizes gradually. Your breathing becomes slower. That itchy pressure between shoulder blades fades into numb calm. You begin to understand medieval bedding as a system, not furniture. Elevation plus insulation plus body clustering plus exhaustion equals warmth enough to survive. No single element works alone. Missing any one part, no straw, no blankets, no body sharing, no raised bed, and the cold would assert itself brutally. Wrap tightly now. Your muscles finally loosen. Sleep seeps in not because you're perfectly warm, but because you are warm enough. You continue to sink deeper into the layered world of medieval bedding, discovering that warmth comes not from a single thick blanket, but from a carefully stacked system of fabric every layer, a deliberate attempt to keep body heat from evaporating into the rest of the room. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval sleepers rely heavily on wool as their primary insulating textile. Linen touches the skin, yes, but wool does the real work, trapping air, wicking dampness, and remaining warm even when moisture accumulates. You feel the linen sheet first smooth, cool, faintly stiff from repeated washing and drying without softeners or starch beyond what nature offers. Linen is comfortable against skin, but useless for insulation alone. Above it come the wool blankets, heavy, lanolin-scented, slightly scratchy. Wool fibers curl naturally, forming millions of tiny air pockets that slow heat loss. It's essentially organic climate technology centuries ahead of its scientific understanding. Historians still argue whether medieval wool production methods resulted in superior thermal properties compared with modern industrial wool, or if perceived warmth differences stem mainly from fabric thickness rather than fiber quality. Regardless, wool reigns because nothing else reasonably available performs better under damp, draft-filled conditions. You tug the blanket around your shoulders like a cloak as you lie down. The weight is comforting but also restrictive. This is not light bedding. Some blankets are so heavy that turning beneath them requires planning a slow roll, coordinated with your tangled neighbors, or careful not to expose skin to the frigid currents swirling at bed edge level. You begin to appreciate the stillness medieval sleepers cultivate. Excess movement equals heat loss, stillness equals sustainability. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you recall village chatter. Some families sew small inner pouches within blankets to stuff with dried grasses or additional wool scraps, creating thermal hot spots meant to cover kidneys or feet. Think medieval heating pads, minus electricity, and plus hay dust. These modifications aren't standardized. Of course, they vary household to household and rely wholly on improvisation. Over the wool lies the outer covering. Fleece-lined cloaks repurposed as bed blankets, fur pelts from sheep, rabbits, or deer. Fur is luxurious but impractical for everyday laundering, leading to distinctive odors when damp. The hair traps air exceptionally well, making fur undeniably effective at warmth retention, even if your nose questions the hygiene benefits. Some fortunate households own bed curtains, thick, hanging cloth, draped around sleeping platforms to create a warm bubble by limiting airflow. You'll examine those later more closely, but even now you understand layering philosophy. Navigate heat retention through barriers within barriers rather than increasing absolute temperature. Historians still debate whether access to fur bedding significantly improved survival rates during winter illness or simply offered marginal comfort. Medical outcomes are hard to trace conclusively, yet household inventories obsessed over fur possessions strongly suggest perceived health benefits. Sleeping uncovered feels impossible. You experiment briefly, sliding 1 foot from beneath blankets and within seconds retracted in mock horror as chill slices through your toes. You feel like you've committed a personal betrayal to warmth physics. 3 seconds is plenty to learn a hard lesson. Children and elders receive additional coverings when available lighter furs or smaller wool layers folded over shoulders. Body size matters. Smaller individuals lose heat faster. Medieval households may not phrase it as thermoregulation vulnerability, but they act on it intuitively, tucking smaller bodies deeper into insulated layers whenever possible. Here's one of the rare jokes whispered near you. A toddler wrapped so tightly she resembles a loaf of bread is declared fit for baking till spring. Her mother groans but smiles anyway. The accumulation of layers creates unexpected challenges. Moisture builds beneath them. Sweat from clustered bodies dampens linen and wool slowly through the night. Wool remains warm when damp, but linen chills fast, leading to that uncomfortable early morning cold feeling medieval sleepers know well warm to sleep, shivery to wake. Some families rotate bedding regularly to dry near hearth fires, though winter damp means complete drying remains a struggle. Historians still argue whether medieval bedding hygiene standards meaningfully prevented mold or respiratory problems. Accounts suggest both frequent airing practices and persistent indoor damp issues existed side by side, with far from universal effectiveness. You notice protective layering extends beyond bedding itself. Many people keep sleeping caps on soft felt or wool hoods that preserve scalp heat and cover ears against nighttime cold. Head warmth dramatically affects perceived comfort. Lose it, and your whole body shivers faster. You test the cap yourself and instantly find your shoulders relaxing a notch downward as heat retention stabilizes. Foot wrappings, scrap wool strips tied loosely around ankles perform similar service. No socks as we know them yet, but plenty of improvisation. As laughter hushed earlier echoed near the hearth, now only muffled breathing remains. You're cocooned, immobilized by heavy layers. This stillness becomes hypnotic. You can feel how each textile barrier quietly firms into place as body heat warms inner pockets. Eventually, a steady thermal envelope stabilizes around you. This works, but only once stillness settles fully. Shifting or uncovering even part of yourself invites the cold back aggressively. You learn the medieval sleep discipline: commit wholly to your position because movement has consequences. Historians still argue how fragmented medieval sleep truly was. Is first sleep and second sleep universal or localized? Regardless, during winter nights, people likely remain tucked deeply into bedding for long, uninterrupted stretches simply to preserve warmth, even when wakeful. The cold itself enforces sleep continuity. You reach mental calm before full unconsciousness arrives. The mountain of blankets presses you ever closer to bedmates, whose warmth adds quietly to yours. Linens chill beneath your cheek, but wool covers the rest of your body evenly now. The outside cold hasn't changed, but your layered human system has adapted. Warm enough, not comfortable, not cozy, but sufficient. Sleep finds you between fibers and fur. You drift through the night half aware, conscious of one undeniable truth: you are still wearing your daytime clothes beneath the bedding. This isn't an accident or forgetfulness, it's standard winter practice. The mainstream historical fact holds that medieval people generally sleep clothed, particularly during cold months. Nightwear as a separate category barely exists for most households. Linen shifts or undershirts double as sleep garments, while heavier tunics, hose, and even cloaks remain on the body when temperatures plunge. You feel the weight of wool tunic against your chest, the fabric warming slowly as your body heat fills the fibers. You instinctively tug your cloak tighter beneath the blankets. Clothing extends your personal heat retention system, adding yet another air-trapping layer. Unlike modern pajamas designed primarily for comfort, medieval night clothing functions as defensive insulation. Historians still argue whether people routinely removed their belts, boots, or outerwear before bed, or if they slept largely as dressed. Evidence from household accounts suggests variation. Wealthier sleepers often stripped down to linen shifts, while the laboring classes commonly slept semi-fully clothed to avoid nighttime chills and simplify early morning work. In winter, practicality overwhelms any concern for fashion dignity. You consider the genius of layering not just atop the body, but on the body. Your underlayer traps warmth. The heavy tunic blocks airflow. The cloak reinforces insulation like a wearable duvet. The sensation borders on being swaddled twice. One quirky tidbit catches your attention. Some people sleep in their hats. Nightcaps, simple wool hoods, or felt coifs remain worn overnight, both for warmth and hair protection. Losing heat through the scalp accelerates bodily cooling sharply. Medieval instinct recognizes this centuries before thermodynamic equations confidently confirm it. There's evidence that travelers and sailors adopt this habit aggressively, sleeping fully capped even indoors. You test this yourself, adjusting the hat slightly lower on your forehead. Immediately you feel the subtle retention of warmth around your temples and ears. An almost ridiculous improvement from such a small garment earns quiet respect. Sock culture is primitive by modern standards. Most people rely on foot wrappings tied beneath trousers or around bare ankles inside bed coverings. True knitted socks are still evolving and not universal. Some unlucky sleepers experience the annoying phenomenon of cold toes despite full body layering. Your brain can forgive cold shoulders but seems uniquely offended by frozen feet. Someone nearby mutters the night's second joke. If I lose my toes to winter, I'll still have 10 socks for summer. Sleepy groans supply the audience response. Clothing becomes a survival envelope, especially important when bedding supply is low or crowded. Travelers sharing beds at inns often keep outer cloaks fully wrapped around themselves, sealing warmth through learned knot techniques that resemble complicated sailor knots more than fashion accessories. Some legends persist of people sleeping upright in cloaks when bed space is unavailable not comfortably, but frost-free. Historians still debate how widespread clothed sleeping actually was versus how often it signals poverty. Upper-class attire, etiquette favored linen-only sleep due to hygiene concerns, believing wool absorbed bodily impurities overnight, a quaint but widespread idea. Whether hygiene or prestige motivated this difference remains unclear. Comfort suffers in clothing-based sleep. Buttons press unpleasantly into ribs. Seams rub against skin. Buckles occasionally clink when someone shifts position like soft medieval wind chimes. But the discomfort rarely outweighs the threat of cold. People endure scratchy goosebump quietly. Movement remains minimal. No tossing and turning television insomnia nights here. You must commit to stillness or invite the cold in. Your clothing layers crinkle softly when you shift, reminding you how much fabric stands between skin and room air. Some sleepers adopt specialized heat-holding poses. Arms crossed like self-hugs beneath cloaks, knees drawn upward sharply, even hands tucked beneath thighs to preserve finger heat. The body becomes a bundle, shape altered by necessity. You begin to sense the psychological shift. Clothing during sleep renders vulnerability muted. The usual naked, warm vulnerability of modern sleep reverses. You feel safer, bound within cloth. Encased. A quirky folk habit appears among older villagers. Stuffing dried herbs, lavender, sage, or thyme into clothing folds near the chest, thought to both warm the heart and repel winter ailments. Scientifically questionable? Maybe emotionally potent? Absolutely. Herbal warmth charms persist centuries beyond their measurable effect. Historians still argue whether such folk remedies offered placebo benefits significant enough to improve sleep quality, or whether their effect remained purely symbolic. But symbolic comfort can ease mental stress, which indirectly improves rest. You listen to breathing patterns shift. Someone sighs heavily through layers of wool. Another coughs faintly before settling again. The faint hiss of embers burning out echoes from the hearth. The combined warmth of bodies builds a microclimate in the crowded sleep zone, helped by clothing insulation. Toward early morning, clothing begins to cool as external cold overpowers dying internal warmth. Linens chill against skin, but your wool tunic holds strong, preventing temperature collapse. Feet feel coldest. You wiggle them within wraps, generating friction warmth until nerve endings quiet down again. Sleeping clothed also shortens the gap between sleep and morning mobility. When dawn creeps back into the hall, sleepers do not shiver naked into boots, they simply rise. This transition is vital. Minimal exposure to freezing halls between sleep and chores reduces illness risk. Medieval mornings waste no body heat on wardrobe assembly. There's no graceful wake-up routine here. It's more like a bundled replacement of one labor phase with another. Wrapped fully now between clothing and blankets, eyes drifting closed again in intermittent waking, you realize medieval sleep is not relaxation. It is survival stitched together in fabric layers. Warm enough to last one more night. You stir as a sleeping neighbor shifts closer, half conscious of the unspoken medieval rule. Bodies draw warmth better together than apart. Communal sleeping defines your night now, not just a matter of economy or crowding, but a heat-sharing strategy born of necessity. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval households commonly share sleeping spaces across ages and roles. Parents, children, servants, and even occasional guests bundled into a single room or hall. Beds themselves are often shared by 2 or more people, especially in winter. You feel the thermal effect immediately. Your neighbor's shoulder radiates gentle heat into your side, dulling the cold creeping through clothing near your ribs. It's surprisingly effective. Human bodies produce steady warmth about the output of small electric heaters, but in medieval halls, clustering concentrates heat where it matters most. Historians still argue whether communal sleeping primarily evolved for warmth, security, or social norms. The truth likely blends all three. Cold demands proximity, insecurity encourages togetherness, and privacy standards differ from modern ones. What you'd now consider awkward was probably unremarkable. A quirky tradition surfaces among traveling companions. Rotational bedding, those who run warm occupy bed centers while cooler sleepers take edges. Then positions shift throughout the night if someone wakes cold or sweaty. Like cooperative heat choreography, though, definitely without instruction manuals. You sense elbows tucked carefully beyond personal borders that barely exist here. Limbs share limited territory with practiced politeness. People sleep in predictable curled shapes to avoid over-encroaching communal muscle memory preserved across generations. Children pile closest to adults not for sentiment alone, but because adult body mass radiates more stable heat. The smallest bodies cluster in middle pockets, forming living warm cores. You see a toddler sleeping crosswise over 2 chests like a heated blanket that somehow became sentient. The adults do not object, they likely appreciate the arrangement more than the child does. Laughter would follow the mental image of modern families adopting similar sleep structures, though nobody dares say so aloud midwinter. Historians still debate whether medieval people practiced concepts of privacy similar to ours or experienced sleep as a neutral social state, unburdened by embarrassment. What we know is that diaries and letters rarely express discomfort about bed sharing. Discomfort mentions focus overwhelmingly on cold rather than awkward proximity. Shared beds occur not only in homes. Inns serve multiple strangers per mattress, creating mixed heat pools of weary travelers layered beneath stacked blankets and cloaks. Chest-to-back sleeping positions become pragmatic arrangements. Social boundaries dissolve under thermal necessity like frost under morning Sunday. Quirky tidbit. Some inns advertise hot beds not heated by fire but by rotation. Guests take turns sleeping in recently vacated beds whose residual warmth remains trapped in mattresses and blankets. In optimal conditions, warmth lingers for perhaps an hour, a strange kind of thermal leasing. And yes, it's as awkward as it sounds. As you settle into the collective sleep mass, you feel how bodies create barriers to airflow. Gaps between limbs block drafts. Even breathing warms shared air microscopically. The entire cluster slowly raises ambient temperature near faces. In isolation, you'd shiver unendingly, but together, heat becomes self-sustaining. Yet communal sleeping carries challenges. Snoring echoes, magnified by low rafters. Someone shifts, jostling several sleepers at once like sardines responding to pressure waves. Another cough sends ripples of waking murmurs that gradually still. Personal space becomes miniature, existing in inches rather than feet. You adjust your arm to avoid placing it directly across another's neck, which risks both suffocation and unwanted midnight accusations. Polite repositioning becomes a silent art. Historians still debate whether medieval sleep was lighter due to constant interruptions or whether exhaustion created unusually deep slumber regardless of disruptions. You suspect both are true. Micro-awakenings happen often, but exhaustion crushes extended wakefulness, flattening most nighttime discomforts into forgettable blips. Warmth, though, remains the dominant motivator. Nobody moves without absolute necessity. The body learns to tolerate awkward positions rather than risk exposure during repositioning. The typical medieval sleeper may go hours without shifting, cocooned by blankets and neighbors alike. A second nighttime joke ripples through the edge sleepers. No fear of ghosts, I'd suffocate 'em before I noticed. Muted laughter trembles briefly before blankets swallow it. Beyond warmth, There's comfort in shared respiration, the quiet synchrony of sleeping bodies around you. You feel less alone. The sensory isolation modern sleepers accept nightly contrasts sharply with this experience. Sound, smell, warmth, and touch coexist here constantly. There is, however, vulnerability too. Illness spreads faster in communal beds. Medical historians still argue how much winter proximity contributed to household respiratory outbreaks. Proximity likely increases odds, yet cold alone severely taxes immune systems as well. Isolating cause remains complex. Despite risks, medieval households consistently prioritize collective warmth over hypothetical infection, a rational choice when hypothermia threatens nightly. You drift deeper into shared rest. The crunch of straw beneath mattress sacks becomes background noise to breathing rhythms. You feel a leg pressed lightly against yours, not intrusive, just present. In dreams, bodies align again with mechanical precision, maintaining a central warm pocket like astronauts clustered for survival inside a drifting capsule. Gradually, fatigue triumphs. Consciousness fades into the warm center of humanity, wrapped not only in blankets and clothing, but in closeness itself. Communal sleep isn't preference, it's necessity. And tonight, it works. Your sleep lightens briefly as someone stirs near the hearth, adjusting the thick curtains hanging around a bed frame opposite your cluster. You glimpse the heavy drapery drawn almost fully shut, forming what resembles a fabric tent enclosing the sleepers inside. Now you learn firsthand the medieval miracle of the bed canopy. The mainstream historical fact is that curtain beds, sometimes called box beds or four-posters with hangings, serve as microclimate enclosures. They restrict airflow around sleepers, capturing body heat far more effectively than open bedding alone. While ornate four-poster beds belong mostly to wealthier households, versions of curtained sleeping spaces exist across classes. Even simple wooden frames fitted with cloth panels create measurable warmth pockets. Historians still argue whether canopies originated primarily for warmth, insect protection, or privacy. The answer likely blends all three winter cold promotes use. Summer mosquitoes justify retention, and modesty evolves alongside utility benefits. You edge closer to the curtain bed area, observing the setup more closely. Thick woolen or linen curtains hang from horizontal rails or nailed beams above the bed. The fabric is weighty, worn thin at edges by repeated adjusting. When closed properly, the enclosed space traps enough warmth to noticeably alter interior air temperature. A quirky tidbit. Some bed curtains feature small stitch slits or rope loops at bottom corners, allowing sleepers to enter without fully opening the drapery. Less opening equals less warmth loss. Medieval engineering optimization, no patents filed. Inside the canopy, sleeping bodies rapidly increase internal heat. What you experience feels unmistakably warmer than the open hall. The fabric enclosure interrupts draft flows so effectively that even the subtle breeze near shutters fails to penetrate. Breath condenses faintly along inner cloth walls in the coldest months, indicating real thermal containment. Historians still debate how breathable these canopies remained during sleep. Too much enclosure risks stale air buildup, though open floors and roof vents maintain slow ventilation. Evidence suggests people adjusted curtains instinctively closing tight during deep cold, loosening when air became thick or too warm. Your senses fill with muffled sound as fabric dampens echoes. Snoring becomes distant hum rather than disruptive thunder. Fires crackle softly beyond enclosure walls. Even neighbors shifting seems quieter. Canopies also function psychologically. Enclosure creates a boundary of safety, transforming shared halls into individualized sleep spaces. In the candlelit gloom, closed curtains establish the illusion of solitude despite crowded surroundings. A minor joke whispered from your side, "When curtains close, nobody snores." Not true, but comforting mythology nonetheless. Some wealthier households hang colorful tapestry-style fabrics decorated with biblical scenes or floral designs, a surreal contrast to the gritty realities of daily life. Sleeping beneath angels and vine motifs while fleas roam straw mattresses becomes one of history's stranger contradictions. Canopy beds are often elevated further than standard frames, another warmth advantage. Bodies sit farther from cold ground air wells and closer to trapped warm ceiling zones. Several thermal optimization techniques occur simultaneously: elevation, enclosure, insulation. Historians still debate whether curtained beds provided enough warmth to reduce winter mortality or simply alleviated discomfort without improving survival odds. Records show wealthier populations experience lower cold season mortality rates than poorer groups, but isolating bedding as the causal factor versus nutrition or housing differences remains unresolved. A few poorer households mimic canopy benefits, draping spare cloaks or sacks across rope lines suspended above sleeping areas, makeshift bed tents that look chaotic but often work impressively. Improvisation triumphs again. You willingly crawl into a partially curtained bed space to compare conditions. The temperature difference is unmistakable. No more drifting drafts nibbling ankles or fingertips. Breath comes longer, deeper. Muscles unclench slightly. You realize why curtain beds remain prized possessions in inventories. They perform essential survival function far beyond decorative appeal. Yet, enclosure is not flawless. Inside, moisture builds more rapidly. Condensation dampens linens. Some sleepers complain of waking clammy, warm, but wet. Wool handles moisture reasonably well, but linen chills sharply when damp, leading to cold discomfort once the body cools again near dawn. Historians still argue whether increased humidity inside curtained beds exacerbated winter respiratory illnesses or if stable warmth outweighed moisture risks. Evidence remains ambiguous. Your neighbor carefully reopens a small curtain seam to admit slight airflow while keeping warmth intact, micro-adjustments learned through trial. Such behavior aligns with survival craftsmanship far subtler than we credit medieval life for possessing. Outside the enclosure, the hall continues cooling. Bodies away from heat clusters curl tighter. You hear a muffled curse as someone's foot slips free of blankets. These struggles remain external once you nest inside curtains. Within the soft fabric walls, time seems to slow. Insulated quiet cloaks the senses. You float near sleep's edge again. Canopies may not modernize medieval living conditions, but they reshape winter nights into manageable micro-refuges. Fabric and human breath combine to build tiny sanctuaries invisible from outside. Your breathing steadies inside the cloth cocoon. Warm enough. You awaken briefly to the faint scent of smoke mingling with the earthy aroma of straw and wool, a combination that defines winter nights in these medieval halls. Your body shifts slightly, testing the stillness of the surrounding warmth, and you notice how much attention you unconsciously pay to airflow, temperature pockets, and proximity to others. This is the unseen choreography of survival during the coldest months. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval people were acutely aware of cold's dangers. Chronic exposure to low temperatures could lead to hypothermia or illness, and households designed sleeping arrangements to maximize shared warmth. Human ingenuity, rather than technology, dictated survival. Beds, clothing, curtains, and body clustering all combine into a systematic approach to preserving heat. Historians still debate whether awareness of cold risks extended beyond practical survival into conscious nightly planning. Some scholars suggest medieval sleep routines such as first sleep and second sleep emerged partly to manage body heat, while others argue it was purely cultural and ritualistic. Either way, your body experiences the physical reality firsthand. The hall may be frigid, but human and fabric insulation together create a temporary, controlled climate. You glance at the small children tucked between adults, noticing how they serve dual roles. Not only do they benefit from proximity, but they also act as mini heat generators, tiny bundles radiating warmth outward. This isn't purely functional. There is an emotional dimension too. Sleeping in close clusters reinforces social bonds and safety, though survival remains the underlying reason. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some households practice strategic head placement during sleep, rotating sleepers so heads rest over warmer regions like stacked blankets or heated mats, while feet occupy colder edges. This creates a primitive but effective method of heat distribution. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, yet demonstrates ingenuity in everyday life. The hall itself plays a role. Open hearths, timber-framed walls, thatched roofs, and even window coverings all influence how air moves and where warmth concentrates. You feel how each structural quirk, gaps in walls, poorly fitted shutters, uneven floorboards creates miniature drafts or unexpected heat pockets. These microvariations dictate behavior. Which side to sleep on, where to place limbs, even when to stir for minimal movement. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of such strategies. Did wall hangings, bed curtains, and animal-assisted warmth significantly extend survival rates? Or were they primarily comfort tools with marginal physiological impact? While definitive evidence is scarce, it's clear that experience honed these habits over generations. You sense this wisdom encoded in every careful movement around the fire and bed. Animals provide an overlooked yet crucial thermal benefit. Dogs, cats, and sometimes pigs share living spaces, not merely for companionship, but as living heat reservoirs. Their small bodies radiate warmth continuously. In smaller homes, the practice is essential. In larger halls, it's supplemental. You notice the dog nestled at someone's feet. Its warmth tangible, almost measurable as you shift closer to its flank. A joke flutters through the half-conscious hall. Beware, the dog is taking your pillow, but at least you share heat. Sleepy laughter follows, more instinct than deliberate amusement. You also notice human ingenuity in bed placement itself. Beds near hearths gain advantage from radiant heat. Elevated frames isolate from cold floors. Some households stack beds along walls with minimal spacing, creating corridors of warmth where bodies act as insulation barriers. Every design element reflects adaptation to persistent winter threats. Historians still debate the extent to which cultural norms versus environmental necessity drove these arrangements. Were beds placed near fires primarily for warmth, or did status and visual hierarchy play equally strong roles? Likely both, depending on wealth and context. You sense the temperature differential sharply. Hearth-proximate beds are comfortably warm, while distant corners remain shivering cold. This reinforces behavior. Sleep where warmth is most accessible. Some hall residents even schedule rotations to ensure everyone benefits during prolonged nights, subtly combining fairness and survival. A quirky tidbit. Medieval families sometimes warmed bricks or stones in hearths, wrapping them in cloth and placing them at the feet of sleepers. These primitive hot water bottles provided targeted warmth, often reviving frostbitten toes or stiff fingers. Effectiveness varies, but creativity impresses modern sensibilities. You feel the weight of your blankets, the gentle press of a neighbor's shoulder, the protective canopy of curtains, and the hum of breathing all around. Each element plays a role in human thermal management. It's instinctual, yet carefully optimized through repeated trial and observation across generations. The hall remains quiet except for occasional shifting, light snoring, and the faint whisper of embers dying in the hearth. You understand that medieval cold is not merely a background condition, it is the force that shapes every aspect of nightly life, from clothing and bedding to social organization and human interaction. And yet, within this complex system of adaptation, you finally recognize it. Warmth enough to survive, enough to rest, enough to fall asleep. Your eyes flutter open again, though the hall remains steeped in pre-dawn dimness. You stretch cautiously, aware that movement outside your carefully layered cocoon risks letting the cold creep back in. You notice that even breathing carefully is a thermal strategy. Exhaled air rises in small puffs, and any abrupt movement can displace the delicate equilibrium of warmth around you. This is the medieval nighttime lesson that modern sleepers rarely encounter. The mainstream historical fact is that airflow management was central to medieval sleeping practices. Open windows, chimneys, and door gaps produce unpredictable drafts, and even subtle currents can quickly sap heat from bodies or bedding. People instinctively place beds, pile blankets, and adjust curtains to minimize these thermal drains. Your body experiences the physical consequences, tiny chills along exposed wrists or neck as you adjust, prompting near automatic correction. Historians still argue whether airflow awareness informed architectural design or evolved purely from household observation. Evidence points to both. Larger houses feature hearths, shutters, and strategically placed beds reflecting knowledge of heat movement, while smaller cottages rely solely on learned behavior and layering ingenuity. In either case, thermal literacy is a nightly necessity. You glance toward the hearth again, though now it's mostly embers. The minimal heat radiating upward is enough to stabilize body temperatures in nearby beds, but insufficient to warm open hall areas fully. A clever household employs heat reflectors, iron plates, or hanging boards angled to push the last warmth towards sleeper positions. Not everyone has access to such devices, but the principle appears in surviving inventories and letters. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some rural households hang small cloth bags filled with sand or dried herbs near bedposts to absorb residual heat from the fire, then position them at feet or shoulders to prolong warmth. Effectiveness varies, but the practice demonstrates the creative interplay between heat sources, materials, and intuition. You feel the impact of communal breathing once more. Body heat rises, mingling with your own. Close sleepers act as living heaters, their respiration gently influencing microclimate conditions. These interactions aren't accidental. They evolve naturally in crowded winter spaces, enhancing comfort through proximity. Historians still debate whether such communal arrangements substantially increased winter survival rates or simply reduced discomfort. Correlation exists, but causation remains less clear due to confounding factors like diet, overall housing quality, and social rank. You notice, however, that the physical sensation of warmth alone fosters calm and lowers metabolic stress. Sleep interruptions are common. Someone coughs, adjusting abruptly under blankets. Another stretches frozen limbs into a new position, disturbing the balance. Yet, each movement is brief, quickly corrected. The hall returns to thermal equilibrium almost immediately thanks to the density of blankets, clothing, and shared body mass. Animals contribute quietly but meaningfully. The dog at the foot of your bed shifts slightly, pressing against your ankles. Cats pad across distant floorboards, adding sporadic localized warmth. Even occasional livestock in larger halls, pigs, goats, or sheep, provide small, consistent heat sources. Medieval humans are pragmatic. If an animal can contribute warmth, it is encouraged to sleep nearby. A whispered joke drifts across the room. If the dog gets warmer than you, you'll hear about it in the morning. Humorous, but also accurate. Hierarchies of warmth exist, and body mass often dictates priority. You notice subtle strategies of thermal preservation, curling tighter in bed, tucking hands under thighs, keeping blankets fully wrapped around torsos, and choosing sleeping positions to reduce exposed surface area. Every motion is purposeful, designed to minimize energy loss. The cold hall enforces these practices unconsciously, shaping posture and behavior. Historians still argue the degree to which medieval individuals consciously optimized for heat versus simply enduring what was tolerable. Behavioral evidence suggests both. Habitual routines exist alongside improvisational solutions, indicating a blend of learned experience and situational adjustment. You recognize the delicate balance of cold, clothing, bedding, communal presence, and ambient airflow. Together, they create a microcosm of thermal management that allows people to survive nights far colder than modern interiors permit. Even as the embers die completely and outside frost tightens, the layered, communal, and strategic systems of warmth persist. You feel it, the quiet success of centuries of adaptation holding bodies safe and allowing sleep to continue. Finally, in the dim pre-dawn hush, you drift back toward unconsciousness, cradled by layered textiles, human warmth, and the last vestiges of fire-radiated heat. Survival, comfort, and sleep coexist here seamlessly. Morning approaches, though the world beyond the hall remains a gray expanse of frost and thin light. You sense the subtle shift in temperature. The embers are now entirely dead, and without the hearth's radiance, the hall cools steadily. Yet, remarkably, the warmth preserved by layered bedding, clothing, and human proximity lingers long enough to sustain life and keep limbs from freezing. The mainstream historical fact is that heat retention overnight depended as much on inertia and insulation as on active fire. Body heat and textiles create slow-release warmth that carries sleepers into early morning, sometimes hours after the fire dies. Historians still argue whether such passive heat retention was sufficient in the coldest regions or merely marginally better than total exposure. Diaries and letters provide anecdotal evidence. Some travelers or villagers describe waking stiff but alive, suggesting that medieval strategies were indeed effective for survival, if not for comfort. You feel that effectiveness now in your slowly awakening body. Numb fingers gradually thaw. Your spine begins to uncoil from tight fetal positions, and heat pockets remain surprisingly intact. A quirky tidbit drifts into your half-conscious thoughts. Some households place hot stones or iron pans wrapped in cloth beneath sleeping mats or near feet before bedtime. These objects radiate warmth over several hours, functioning as medieval hot water bottles. The effectiveness varies depending on stone size and insulation, but any additional heat source is welcome in freezing winter conditions. You shift slightly to feel a similar warmth trickle across the soles of your feet, proof that these clever hacks work even centuries later. As the hall grows lighter with the first hints of day, you become aware of movement. Other sleepers stir gently, adjusting positions, releasing small puffs of warm air, creating localized thermal microclimates. In some wealthier homes, servants begin quietly stoking fires and moving embers toward prearranged containers to revive warmth for morning chores. In more modest dwellings, no such preparation occurs, leaving reliance entirely on layered clothing and communal warmth. Your body benefits from both, residual heat and neighbors still snugly pressed nearby. Historians still debate the extent to which these morning routines reflect necessity versus ritual. Were fires stoked primarily for thermal comfort or to prepare water and cooking implements? Likely both. Survival intertwines seamlessly with domestic preparation. The smell of lingering smoke, mingled with damp wool and straw, reinforces the hall's olfactory identity, an unchanging aspect of winter sleep. This scent signals both warmth and the ongoing presence of life, grounding you in the medieval context. People rarely describe it as unpleasant. It is simply the backdrop of existence during the cold months. You notice the behavioral patterns honed by centuries of adaptation. Limbs remain tucked where they were most insulated, and even minor adjustments prioritize retaining heat. Stretching slowly, you observe a neighbor using a cloak to shield exposed arms while standing, a micro-practice designed to prevent morning chill. The logic is instinctive. Reduce immediate heat loss while transitioning from sleep to activity. A subtle joke drifts from a nearby child, half asleep. I think my toes are still dreaming of summer. Laughter trickles through the room quietly, muffled by wool blankets and layered human bodies, a ritual acknowledgement that cold is tolerated with humor. Animals remain close, their small bodies radiating residual warmth. Dogs reposition, cats curl atop straw sacks, and even the occasional goat or pig snuffles softly, maintaining the hall's thermal ecosystem. Their presence doubles as security and comfort. Sleeping with animals is both practical and emotional. Warmth is gained, loneliness mitigated. Historians still debate the extent to which animal proximity influenced health. Were illnesses spread more rapidly through shared space, or did thermal benefit outweigh disease risk? Evidence points ambiguously to both, leaving interpretation open but confirming the practice's persistence across households. By this point, you sense the intricate interplay of textiles, bodies, and structure. Blanket weight, clothing layers, curtain enclosures, and human clustering collectively maintain warmth that outlasts the fire's lifespan. The cold hall cannot immediately conquer these adaptations. Sleep's microclimate remains stable, softening the harsh edges of winter mornings. You realize medieval sleep is a calculated balance of environment, material culture, and human behavior. Each layer, each adjustment, each proximity choice compounds the others, forming a coherent survival system. And as daylight gradually expands into the hall, your body, still insulated, begins to stir, not shivering, not desperate, but gently transitioning from one temperature equilibrium to another. This is winter sleep as practiced by those who face the cold without modern heating, an art of adaptation and patience executed nightly through centuries of observation, trial, and minor ingenuity. Your body feels the success of these practices, the culmination of human design against winter's persistent bite. And as consciousness grows fully aware, the cold hall seems less threatening, more manageable, a testament to centuries of learned strategies and human resilience. You rise just enough to feel the chill of morning creeping into the hall. Despite all the layered blankets, clothing, and human proximity, the absence of active fire begins to remind you of how harsh the cold truly is. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval winter mornings were frequently colder than any indoor temperature we consider comfortable today. Houses lacked central heating, insulation was rudimentary, and drafts snuck in around wooden shutters and poorly fitted doors. Survival often depended on how effectively people layered clothing, positioned bedding, and utilized residual warmth. Historians still argue whether winter lethality was primarily a function of temperature or nutrition. Some evidence suggests that people with access to sufficient caloric intake survived despite frigid interiors, while others succumbed even with minimal exposure if malnourished. You sense that warmth alone is not the whole story, but it is undeniably central to nightly endurance. Your body reacts to the morning cold instinctively. Hands inch beneath layered cloaks, arms cross to trap residual heat, and you wiggle your feet within wool wrappings, activating friction-based warmth. Movements are slow, careful, and deliberate. Every action designed to maintain heat while preparing for the day. Medieval humans treat such micro-adjustments almost as second nature, a habitual awareness built over years of exposure. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some households, people use foot warmers, small metal boxes filled with heated coals or stones placed at the end of the bed. Sometimes these are shared among multiple sleepers, rotated carefully to prevent burns. Your toes would surely appreciate such an invention now, although you notice that most rural families rely on layered blankets and human warmth rather than hot boxes. The practice is less universal than we imagine, but it reveals creative problem solving. Animals continue to contribute to residual warmth. Dogs shift closer to human bodies as if sensing the cooler air. Cats curl against straw, and occasionally, a piglet nestled under blankets remains a tiny, warm heat source. Human and animal co-sleeping is a centuries-old strategy. Bodies radiate warmth and simultaneously provide a sense of comfort and security. In winter, companionship and thermal necessity overlap seamlessly. Historians still debate whether co-sleeping with animals increased disease risk or whether the thermal advantage outweighed hygiene concerns. Records remain inconclusive, but repeated practice suggests survival outweighed minor health anxieties. You become aware of subtle social dynamics and shared sleeping arrangements. Adults often occupy strategic positions near weaker or smaller sleepers' children, elderly or infirm, so that heat is distributed efficiently. Taller or heavier sleepers may serve as heat anchors, while smaller ones nestle into warm pockets. This spatial hierarchy is informal but learned across generations. You notice your position in the bed cluster aligns with these principles instinctively. You are neither at an edge nor the center, optimizing exposure to warmth while minimizing energy loss. A joke drifts from a neighbor. If you wake cold, blame the dog, not the blankets. Humorous, yes, but also a reflection of the practical truth. Each body contributes or detracts from communal heat, and social harmony involves careful observation of these contributions. You also notice how structural features of the hall influence morning warmth. Beams radiate residual heat from the fireplace, uneven floorboards concentrate cold currents, and wall hangings trap air layers that act as insulation. Even the position of sleeping mats relative to the hearth dramatically alters thermal conditions. This spatial awareness is ingrained from childhood. Everyone instinctively seeks the spots where heat lingers longest. Historians still debate whether these practices evolved independently in each household or whether they represent a codified folk wisdom shared across communities. Evidence leans toward both. Isolated innovation combined with generational transmission of learned strategies. You begin to stretch carefully, unrolling tightly curled legs, lifting arms while maintaining contact with blankets and neighbors. The cold is more present now, but you rely on accumulated warmth from layered textiles, human bodies, and residual heat in bedding. Your body's internal heat retention is tested yet again, highlighting how medieval strategies are not just precautionary, they are essential survival tools. By now, even the faintest drafts are perceptible, pushing you to keep clothing and bedding adjustments continuous. Nighttime stillness is over, replaced by morning tactical movement, slow, deliberate, and coordinated with the shared thermal environment. Each motion is an exercise in minimizing heat loss while preparing for activity, a quiet choreography honed over countless generations. As the hall fills with the soft noises of shifting sleepers, murmured greetings, and occasional laughter, you feel the culmination of layered warmth strategies. Each blanket, cloak, curtain, and human body has contributed to a complex but effective survival ecosystem. Winter mornings are cold, yes, but with careful planning and communal cooperation, the experience becomes manageable, almost predictable. In this realization, you see the medieval night-to-morning transition as a delicate dance between human physiology, material culture, and environmental adaptation. You are not merely waking, you are emerging from a carefully constructed thermal microcosm that allowed people to survive and function despite frigid conditions. And even now, the ingenuity of centuries whispers gently through every fiber, every layered garment, every shared body, ensuring that warmth, though finite, persists. You notice the subtle shift in sound as the hall wakes. The soft hum of shared breath diminishes as sleepers stretch and adjust, blankets rustle, and the occasional clink of metal or wooden fastenings punctuates the quiet. The mainstream historical fact is that noise and activity in medieval sleeping spaces were inherently linked to survival. Movement helped redistribute warmth, and whispered coordination minimized heat loss while keeping domestic operations functional. Even the smallest sounds, foot shuffles, or blanket rustles reflect intentional adaptation rather than carelessness. Historians still argue whether medieval sleep was lighter than modern sleep due to environmental stressors, or whether humans adapted biologically to remain largely undisturbed by routine nocturnal activity. Diaries suggest fragmented sleep was common, yet people still achieved restorative rest. You feel this delicate balance now, drifting between groggy awareness and the warmth preserved by bedding, clothing, and close proximity to others. A quirky tidbit emerges from the early stirrings. Some households implement small morning rituals to preserve warmth for as long as possible. For example, a child might be lifted into a parent's arms for a few minutes of shared body heat before fully rising, or a layer of blankets might be temporarily rearranged to shield those waking earliest from drafts. These micro-practices reflect both care and learned survival instinct. You notice your own behavior aligns unconsciously. Hands remain tucked into sleeves, feet rub slowly within wool wrappings, and your body shifts minimally to avoid losing hard-won warmth. Survival in these cold halls demands energy conservation and efficiency, even in seemingly trivial motions. Animals stir too. Cats stretch, dogs yawn and reposition, pigs shuffle slightly, each movement creating small pulses of heat that mix with human warmth. In smaller homes, the intermingling of species and humans forms a surprisingly effective ecosystem of thermal management. You marvel at how instinct, learned behavior, and environmental necessity converge here. Historians still debate the role animals played in household survival. While warmth is apparent, questions remain about disease transmission, hygiene, and the long-term health impact of close cohabitation with livestock. Evidence is anecdotal, but patterns suggest the benefits were compelling enough to outweigh potential risks. You notice strategic positioning persists even in morning routines. Taller or heavier individuals act as anchors near the coldest edges, while children and lighter adults nestle into thermal pockets. Blankets are readjusted gradually, not discarded, ensuring minimal heat escape. Every motion demonstrates accumulated practical knowledge. A subtle joke drifts: the coldest toes are never yours if you stay in the center. Humor is as much a survival tactic as textiles, offering psychological warmth that complements physical insulation. You feel the impact of curtain beds and canopy enclosures more clearly now. Those still wrapped in cloth tents benefit from a microclimate that retains warmth longer, allowing extended rest even as ambient temperatures drop. The combination of structure, textiles, and human clustering creates distinct thermal zones within a single hall. It's an early form of indoor climate control driven entirely by observation and improvisation. Historians still debate whether the effectiveness of bed curtains significantly influenced winter mortality or merely comfort perception. Evidence from household inventories and contemporary accounts emphasizes their value, but quantifiable data remains elusive. You note the psychological component as well. Sleepers inside curtained spaces or surrounded by bodies experience not only warmth, but also security, a sense of containment that reduces stress and likely improves sleep quality. Even the smallest gestures, like adjusting a blanket over a child or repositioning a dog near one's feet, carry both functional and emotional significance. You shift slightly to test residual warmth. Your body confirms what the surrounding environment implies. Thermal systems, both human and material, are working effectively. You sense that medieval people, through centuries of trial and adjustment, developed a complex understanding of nocturnal survival that blends practicality, social behavior, and subtle ritual. Even as the hall continues its slow transformation from night to morning, you feel the legacy of these strategies around you. Warmth retained through bodies, textiles, animals, and careful positioning. You're not merely experiencing a cold room. You're participating in an orchestrated, centuries refined system that ensures survival, comfort, and a semblance of rest despite relentless winter chill. And in this quiet, gentle awakening, you recognize that medieval ingenuity is everywhere, whispered softly through shared warmth and practiced routine. The hall grows lighter now, though the cold outside remains sharp enough to make you acutely aware of every exposed patch of skin. You notice that even as sleepers rise or prepare for the day, subtle habits persist: small movements, carefully timed stretches, and strategic blanket adjustments all conserve the warmth accumulated overnight. The mainstream historical fact is that morning routines in winter were tightly bound to survival strategy. Cold exposure at the start of the day could have immediate consequences, including numb extremities, shivering, or even frostbite in extreme cases. Thus, getting out of bed was always a calculated risk. Historians still argue how much effort medieval people consciously invested in morning thermal management versus relying on instinct and habit. Contemporary accounts indicate a mixture. Some households meticulously followed routines to preserve heat, while others appeared to improvise based on available warmth and immediate needs. You feel that balance now, performing small actions with an almost unconscious focus on retaining body heat. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In wealthier households, early risers sometimes warmed wooden floorboards by placing glowing embers or heated stones beneath mats or carpets, providing localized heat before fires were fully stoked. While rare, this demonstrates the extent of creative adaptations to the cold, tiny innovations that could make the difference between comfort and shivering misery. You shift slightly to stretch your arms and legs. Even minor movements are carefully calculated. Stretching too much exposes cooler areas to drafts, while insufficient movement risks stiffness and discomfort. You notice others in the hall perform similar actions, bodies aligned and conditioned to minimize energy loss. The choreography of rising from bed is subtle, precise, and remarkably efficient. Animals stir as well. Dogs stretch, cats yawn, and even pigs or goats in larger halls shuffle softly, radiating heat into microclimates of warmth. Humans and animals operate as a cooperative system, both providing and absorbing warmth, reinforcing each other's survival. Medieval households exploit this natural synergy without the need for modern understanding of thermodynamics. Historians still debate whether the presence of animals in sleeping areas increased illness risk or whether the thermal benefits outweighed potential health concerns. While conclusive evidence is scarce, repeated practices across generations suggest that warmth and companionship prevailed as primary considerations. You notice the nuanced use of bed curtains and canopies during morning transitions. Some sleepers leave them partially drawn to retain pockets of heat, only opening them fully once necessary to rise or begin chores. This controlled manipulation of microclimates reflects the medieval understanding of insulation and energy conservation. Simple fabric becomes a powerful tool when combined with knowledge of airflow and human behavior. A gentle joke ripples from a neighbor. Curtains up, cold down, that's my motto. The humor masks practical truth. The interplay between textiles and warmth dictates the success of morning routines. You feel it in your own body, the lingering comfort of a well-insulated space makes initial movement less jarring. You also notice that strategic positioning within the bed cluster continues to matter. Taller or heavier individuals occupy edges or areas closest to drafts, acting as thermal anchors, while children and lighter adults remain in central warm pockets. Blankets and clothing remain layered until the last possible moment, and even partially dressed bodies move slowly to retain warmth. These adjustments are so refined that modern observers might perceive them as ritual rather than necessity, though they are fundamentally practical. Historians still debate how universal such strategies were across regions and classes. While evidence suggests wealthier households could afford more textiles and controlled spaces, poorer families developed improvisational methods using stacked cloaks, straw layering, and careful body placement to achieve similar survival outcomes. By this point, you recognize a pattern. Medieval winter mornings are less about sudden awakening and more about a gradual, carefully managed transition. Each movement, adjustment, and breath contributes to thermal stability. Even as the hall fills with light and the fire is prepared for full ignition, the strategies honed overnight continue to operate, ensuring that bodies remain protected from the bitter cold. And as you ready yourself to emerge from the layers of blankets, clothing, and shared warmth, you realize that survival is not merely functional, it's an art, woven into the rhythm of daily life, shaped by centuries of experience and subtle innovation. The hall now hums with the low, organized rhythm of morning activity. You feel the subtle shift as people ease out of sleep and into the first gentle tasks of the day. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval winter mornings were approached cautiously because heat had to be conserved and bodies needed time to adjust from the warm cocoon of bedding to the colder surrounding air. No one simply leapt up. Rising was a slow process, designed to keep precious warmth trapped around the body as long as possible. Historians still debate how uniform or structured these morning routines truly were. Some researchers argue that households followed fairly predictable patterns shaped by daylight, fire management, and communal duties. Others believe daily rhythms were much more flexible, changing according to weather, resource availability, and the physical condition of each household member. As you observe the hall, it feels as though both are true at once. Familiar habits guide behavior, yet everything remains adjustable depending on the temperature and the mood of the morning. A quirky tidbit slips into focus. Some medieval people practice what modern researchers sometimes call thermal staging. Instead of fully exiting the warmth of bed all at once, they expose themselves to the cold gradually. Sleeves were rolled up a little at a time. Blankets were folded back in stages, and feet were placed on straw or wool mats before touching bare stone floors. Occasionally, a warmed stone or mug of heated drink was held between the hands to gently bring circulation back to fingers before more movement followed. The whole ritual felt less like waking and more like slowly thawing. You notice how this gentle transition unfolds across the communal space. Someone sits upright but keeps their blanket wrapped tightly around their shoulders while folding clothing in their lap. Another remains seated on the bed's edge, layering socks or foot wrappings while breathing into their cupped hands. A child is held close for a few moments, tucked under an adult's cloak before being guided toward the hearth side of the hall. These movements are unhurried, quiet, and deeply practical. The animals respond to the morning subtly, too. Dogs lift their heads and stretch, repositioning themselves closer to clusters of people still radiating warmth. Cats abandon colder corners and slip toward the last glowing embers tucked beneath ash. Livestock in larger halls shuffle into the warmer regions near human activity. Their movements are steady and instinctive, naturally redistributing heat throughout the shared space. Historians still debate whether animals were kept primarily for warmth or simply tolerated indoors for practical reasons like safety and monitoring. The evidence points to a mixture of both. Whatever the original motivation, the effect is very clear. Human bodies and animal bodies together produce a gentle thermal network that stabilizes the indoor temperature on cold mornings. You feel your own body performing its small, learned rituals. You rub your palms before slipping them into your sleeves to save heat. A careful stretch loosens stiff muscles without exposing too much skin to chill air. You unwrap your blanket slowly, always keeping the thickest layer around your core. You might even pause, waiting for the warmth from previous movement to catch up with you before taking the next step. Each motion reflects an inherited knowledge of thermoregulation made practical through daily repetition. Bed curtains and canopies remain half closed across the hall. Some sleepers leave them partially drawn longer than others, trapping warmth in small hidden pockets of air while they dress beneath the covers. Others open their curtains just enough to exchange quiet words or check on neighbors without sacrificing their heat. The manipulation of fabric becomes almost ceremonial. Open, pause, close again. Slide the curtain aside, then adjust it back into place once the necessary task is finished. Even cloth is treated as a tool of temperature control. A soft joke floats through the space. Don't steal the fire. View, that glow is keeping me brave. The laughter it inspires is gentle and brief, but it carries warmth of its own. Humor becomes another subtle form of comfort, reminding everyone that shared survival is grounded not only in routine, but also in light-hearted companionship. Social patterns quietly guide the morning flow. Larger or more heavily dressed adults stand or move in draft-prone areas, while smaller figures remain closer to warm centers like the hearth or thicker clusters of people. Blankets are loaned and returned as layers are redistributed. Someone passes a spare cloak without comment to a neighbor finishing breakfast preparations. These exchanges are instinctive, shaped less by instruction than by long familiarity with the needs of cold weather living. Historians still debate how widespread these cooperative habits were across various classes and regions. Wealthier households could rely on thicker textiles, curtained beds, and larger hearths that generated steady heat. Poorer families, however, employed the same guiding principles using simpler tools: stacked straw bedding, multiple patched cloaks, and very close shared sleeping arrangements. The end goal remained constant regardless of wealth: maintain body warmth, shield the vulnerable, and prolong the residual heat of the night for as long as possible. By now, the hall is fully awake, though still subdued. The careful movements of the morning transition into quiet productivity, stoking the fire, sorting supplies, preparing simple meals. Yet, the habits formed during sleep linger. People remain layered and clustered. Curtains are drawn only when warmth is truly secure. Animals continue to drift between human groups as if following invisible streams of heat. You sense that this gradual morning ritual is less about awakening and more about maintaining continuity. Night does not simply end, it fades into day through careful steps that preserve comfort and energy. Each movement builds on the last, creating an unbroken chain of warmth that bridges sleep and activity. In this slow choreography, you witness centuries of refined adaptation, simple routines shaped not by theory, but by lived experience. Survival does not require panic or urgency here, only patience, attentiveness, and cooperation. The medieval winter morning, unfolding before you, becomes less a battle against cold and more a graceful negotiation with it. where every layer adjusted and every step taken serves the quiet goal of staying warm together. The hall is now fully awake, yet a hushed rhythm persists. People move deliberately, balancing the need to perform morning chores with the ever-present cold. You notice that even mundane actions, reaching for a bowl, adjusting blankets, stepping across the floor, require awareness of heat loss. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval winter mornings were long negotiations with temperature. Every gesture aimed at minimizing exposure to frigid air, especially before fires were fully stoked or daylight warmed stone floors. Historians still debate whether such behavioral adaptations were purely learned or if biological acclimatization also played a role. Some evidence suggests repeated exposure to cold enhanced tolerance over time, while habitual practices like layering, positioning, and shared warmth ensured immediate survival. You feel both factors at work. Your body remembers the thermal logic even as your mind observes it anew. A quirky tidbit: in some regions, households place straw or rush mats along floors to create insulated pathways from beds to hearths or latrines. These small additions help prevent cold feet, a seemingly trivial concern with disproportionate consequences. You sense the effectiveness as you gingerly test your toes on the floor, noting how instinct directs your steps toward warmer surfaces. Animals are now more active. Dogs stretch and settle near sun patches or embers, cats wander between human clusters, and livestock shifts toward residual warmth left by co-sleepers. Their presence is integral to morning thermal management, both radiating heat and alerting humans to environmental changes. In essence, the hall operates as a single, responsive ecosystem. Historians still debate whether these animals were primarily utilitarian or also psychological companions. Observations suggest both. Warmth and security remain paramount, but their familiar presence calms occupants, reducing stress in otherwise harsh conditions. You notice micro-adjustments everywhere. Hands remain partially tucked, blankets are repositioned slowly, and heavier individuals instinctively guard colder edges. Movement is calculated to conserve warmth while enabling necessary activity. Even the act of speaking is measured, ensuring breath does not exacerbate chilling drafts. A subtle joke flits through the hall. Careful, your elbows are stealing my warmth again. Humor punctuates survival, a gentle reminder that human connection is as vital as thermal management. Curtain beds and canopies continue to influence morning routines. Some individuals peel back fabric partially to retain a pocket of warmth, creating microclimates that extend comfort until fires are fully stoked. Those without such enclosures rely entirely on layered clothing and strategic positioning, improvising with cloaks or blankets to replicate insulated zones. Historians still argue whether enclosed bed designs were more functional than symbolic. Evidence from inventories and letters suggests that practicality predominates. Warmth, privacy, and draft protection are all benefits. You sense this truth as you observe sleepers transitioning, tents of cloth maintaining residual heat around reluctant risers. You also notice the layered social choreography. Central warm positions are coveted, heavier sleepers guard edges, and children and lighter adults naturally occupy insulated pockets. Even partial clothing removal occurs strategically, preserving core temperature while allowing flexibility. By now, the hall feels alive yet gentle. Movements ripple through the sleeping cluster. Heat flows subtly redistributed, and collective thermal intelligence manifests without explicit instruction. You realize that survival in winter is less about individual effort and more about harmonious cooperation. In this dynamic, deliberate morning, you see medieval ingenuity at its quietest. Each motion, each breath, each minor adjustment reflects centuries of lived experience designed to withstand cold without modern technology. The hall hums with life, warmth, and the subtle satisfaction of survival mastered. The morning light filters weakly through frost-covered windows, casting pale, shifting patterns across the hall's wooden beams and stone floor. You notice that even this faint illumination influences behavior. People tend to gravitate toward brighter patches that promise slightly warmer air, or adjust positions to maximize early sun exposure on faces or hands. The mainstream historical fact is that natural light played a subtle but important role in medieval daily life, helping people gauge time, prioritize chores, and identify spots of warmth before fires fully ignited. Historians still debate whether daylight was consciously used as a thermal guide or primarily for scheduling labor. Some diaries note the sun's warmth on my face as a cue to rise, while architectural designs such as east-facing windows suggest intentional use of light for both illumination and passive heating. Either way, your senses detect the practical value. Where light falls, warmth follows. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. In some rural houses, mirrors or polished metal surfaces were positioned to reflect sunlight onto sleeping mats or hearth-adjacent areas, subtly enhancing localized warmth in the coldest months. You imagine the glint of a small brass plate catching morning rays, channeling a tiny patch of heat to where it's most needed, a medieval sunbeam amplifier. Animals adjust alongside humans. Cats curl near glowing patches. Dogs shift toward the first weak warmth radiating from the dying embers or sunlight, and even small pigs shuffle toward the sunniest corners. Their movement helps redistribute heat, contributing to the hall's living thermal mosaic. You notice how instinctively everyone benefits from these microclimate shifts. Historians still argue whether these behaviors were instinctual, socially taught, or both. Repeated observations suggest that human and animal interactions form a natural thermal ecosystem reinforced by years of generational experience. Your body responds automatically. Hands and feet remain partially insulated, limbs shift minimally to conserve heat, and you adjust posture to maximize residual warmth. Even minor gestures, stretching a finger into a patch of sunlight, adjusting a cloak, reflect adaptive knowledge encoded by experience rather than conscious thought. Curtain beds continue to hold their microclimates. Partial openings allow sleepers to monitor the hall while retaining warmth. Those without enclosures rely on tightly layered blankets, strategically positioned textiles, and close proximity to neighbors or animals. You notice how each household improvises solutions that blend resourcefulness with inherited knowledge. A whispered joke flits from a neighbor. If sunlight can't save your toes, the dog's got you. Laughter punctuates practicality. Humor remains a subtle, human-enhancing survival tool. You observe early morning rituals. Some individuals carefully move to stoke fires while maintaining as much warmth as possible. Others unwrap hot stones or coals wrapped in cloth to distribute targeted heat. Every action balances immediate survival with long-term energy conservation. Historians still debate whether these combined practices significantly improved mortality rates during harsh winters. Evidence is fragmented, but anecdotal and observational records suggest that layered approaches, textiles, positioning, animal warmth, partial heating devices, and careful movement offered tangible benefits. By now, you sense the hall as a living, responsive organism. Light, residual heat, body clustering, and strategic motion converge seamlessly. Morning routines are neither hurried nor chaotic. They are deliberate, synchronized, and efficient. Each participant, human and animal, plays a role in maintaining warmth while preparing for daily life. In this delicate interplay, you feel the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Every instinct, micro-adjustment, and social nuance demonstrates the quiet sophistication of medieval thermal management. You realize that survival is not just about endurance, it's about coordination, observation, and subtle ingenuity. And as light strengthens, warming small corners of the hall, you sense that these centuries-old strategies continue to hold their quiet, elegant power. By mid-morning, the hall has taken on a gentle bustle, yet the cold still presses against every wall and window. You notice that movement is now purposeful but slow. People rise from beds, shuffle toward hearths, and begin the first domestic tasks of the day, all while conserving body heat. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval winter mornings were structured to minimize unnecessary exposure. Every movement, from carrying water to tending fires, was measured to prevent heat loss. Even small missteps, like crossing a drafty doorway too quickly, could leave you shivering for minutes. Historians still debate how much of this morning choreography was conscious versus instinctual. Some evidence suggests that humans naturally developed habits to optimize thermal comfort, while other routines like communal rising times and staggered heating appear socially enforced. You sense both elements at play as you observe the quiet rhythm of the hall. A quirky tidbit. Some households practice thermal relay, where one person would maintain warmth in one area, pass heated objects like stones or coals to another, and rotate through the hall. This system preserved warmth throughout spaces that lacked centralized heat, creating a subtle network of energy transfer. You can almost see it now, in miniature hands passing warm vessels, careful steps across stone floors, blankets adjusted strategically. Animals, predictably, continue their role. Dogs patrol warmer patches, cats wander in search of sunbeams or residual embers, and livestock occasionally shifts closer to human clusters. Their presence amplifies the hall's living thermal network, radiating warmth while responding to human motion. Medieval households, it seems, depended as much on these small creatures as on fabrics or fire. Historians still argue whether the thermal benefits of animals outweighed potential health risks. While co-sleeping could spread parasites or disease, centuries of observation indicate that the survival advantages body heat, security, and comfort were decisive. You notice how textiles continue to play their part. Layers of blankets, furs, and clothing are adjusted carefully. A cloak may be partially removed to allow a hand to tend a fire, but repositioned before the heat dissipates. Even small scraps of fabric, when placed strategically, create microclimates around extremities or vulnerable children. The hall is effectively a patchwork of insulation zones, each curated by its occupant. A light joke surfaces, "Careful not to steal my patch of sun. It's warmer than any blanket." Humor punctuates practicality, reinforcing social cohesion in shared spaces. Survival here relies not only on ingenuity, but also on cooperation and gentle negotiation. Bed curtains and canopies, still partially drawn for those who rise slowly, retain pockets of warmth. People who have yet to leave their mats benefit from residual heat radiating through the fabric. Those without enclosures rely on quick adjustments of blankets and proximity to neighbors, demonstrating how improvisation complements structural solutions. Historians still debate how universal such microclimate awareness was. While wealthier households could afford heavy textiles, structured beds, and heated stones, poorer families relied on ingenuity, observation, and human clustering to survive the coldest months. The underlying principle thermal preservation remains constant across social strata. You notice that morning warmth is as much a social construct as a physical one. Taller or heavier individuals occupy draft-prone edges, children and lighter adults occupy insulated cores, and blankets are shared and shifted as needed. Even partial clothing removal is timed carefully to retain core temperature. By now, the hall feels alive with coordinated movement, subtle adjustments, and shared purpose. The morning is a fluid, orchestrated transition from sleep to daily labor, shaped entirely by centuries of experience and observation. Every breath, step, and gesture is part of the hall's intricate system of survival. And in this quiet choreography, you recognize the sophistication of medieval ingenuity, practical, social, and remarkably adaptive, even in the coldest, most unforgiving winters. The hall hums with mid-morning activity now, yet the cold remains an ever-present backdrop, whispering along the walls and floorboards. You notice how even simple tasks, pouring water, tending a kettle, adjusting a blanket, require constant awareness of temperature and heat retention. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval people developed intricate strategies for conserving warmth during daily routines, not just during sleep. Every movement, placement of textiles, and choice of path through the hall was informed by centuries of trial and error observation. Historians still debate whether these practices were formally taught or absorbed intuitively. Some accounts suggest that children learned thermal management through observation, mimicking adults' careful movements, while other evidence hints at explicit instructions, especially in wealthier households where comfort and status intersected. You see both elements at play, instinct and learned behavior working in concert. A quirky tidbit. Some rural households kept small heated stones in cloth pouches, passing them hand to hand to distribute warmth gradually throughout the hall. This thermal relay system helped prevent cold-induced discomfort or stiffness, and the warmth of human hands amplified the heat transfer. You imagine the subtle movement of these pouches among sleepers and early risers, a quiet, coordinated effort to maintain comfort. Animals continue to shape the hall's microclimate. Dogs shift toward human clusters, cats settle near glowing embers or sunlit patches, and even small livestock pigs or goats shuffle into positions where residual warmth concentrates. Their activity is unplanned yet indispensable. Medieval households relied on animals not just for food and labor, but as living heaters enhancing the collective thermal environment. Historians still debate the balance between animal-derived warmth and hygiene concerns. While cohabitation carried risks of parasites or disease, centuries of experience suggest that the immediate survival benefit was overwhelmingly prioritized. You notice the continued interplay of textiles and positioning. Layers of blankets, furs, and cloaks are adjusted dynamically. A sleeve may be pulled down to tend a fire, then repositioned over a wrist. Children are wrapped carefully, adults shift strategically, and even scraps of cloth become effective insulators when placed thoughtfully. The hall is a living patchwork of microclimates, each subtly curated. A joke floats through the room. "Careful, your elbow is stealing my heat again." Laughter softens the stern practicality of survival, reinforcing social bonds while acknowledging thermal realities. Bed curtains and canopy enclosures retain their quiet utility. Partial openings allow occupants to monitor activity without losing significant warmth. Those without enclosures improvise with layered cloaks and blankets, demonstrating the universality of adaptive thermal strategies. Historians still debate how widely such awareness extended across classes and regions. Wealthier households had structured beds, heavy textiles, and access to heated stones, while poorer families relied on human clustering, layered fabrics, and micro-adjustments to clothing. Yet the underlying principle maximizing warmth while minimizing energy loss remains constant. You notice the subtle social choreography persisting in the hall. Taller or heavier individuals occupy edges or draft-prone areas, central positions favor children and lighter adults, and blankets are shared strategically. Even partial clothing removal is executed with care to preserve core temperature. By now, the hall feels like a living, breathing organism. Coordinated movement, subtle micro-adjustments, and shared warmth allow the medieval household to function efficiently despite frigid conditions. Morning routines blend survival, comfort, and social order into a seamless, centuries-refined dance. And in this ongoing rhythm, you recognize that medieval ingenuity is as much about observation, adaptation, and coordination as it is about materials or fire an intricate system ensuring that life continues, comfortably enough, through the coldest winters. The hall has now fully transitioned into mid-morning, the first tasks of the day well underway. You notice the air is crisper, sharper, yet the interplay of residual heat from humans, animals, and textiles continues to buffer the cold. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval households relied heavily on these passive methods of thermal management fires, layered blankets, animal warmth, and strategic positioning to survive the long, frigid months. Every element of the hall contributes subtly, maintaining a delicate equilibrium between exposure and retention. Historians still argue how much of this balance was consciously maintained versus instinctual. Some evidence from household manuals and diaries suggests deliberate routines and instructions, while anthropological observations indicate a natural, learned skill passed down through generations. As you move lightly across the floorboards, you sense both forces at play in every calculated step. A quirky tidbit. Some families kept small clay or iron vessels filled with hot water tucked under bedding or near feet. Known as rudimentary bed warmers, These items provided localized heat for a limited time, a practical, low-tech solution that complemented blankets, furs, and human body heat. You feel the logic as you imagine the warmth radiating gently, dissipating slowly through layers of textile and human proximity. Animals continue their quiet contributions. Dogs settle near embers or humans, cats wander in search of sunbeams or cozy corners, and livestock occasionally drifts closer to residual warmth. This cohabitation creates a distributed heat network, both instinctively and practically organized. Medieval people appear to have relied as much on their animals for thermal support as for companionship or labor. Historians still debate whether animal presence posed significant health risks. While parasites and disease were possible, the benefits of warmth and comfort likely outweighed these concerns, demonstrating a pragmatic balance between survival needs and hygiene. You observe the continued importance of layering and positioning. Each blanket, cloak, or fur serves a specific role: core insulation, extremity protection, or microclimate creation. Movement is careful, stretching minimally, adjusting layers slowly to preserve warmth. Even scraps of textile are employed strategically to patch cold spots, revealing an intuitive understanding of heat management. A gentle joke drifts from a neighbor. "Mind your elbow, it's stealing my summer." Humor softens the necessity of adaptation, reinforcing social cohesion and reminding everyone that survival often included lighthearted ritual alongside practical measures. Curtains and canopies continue to play an important role. Those still partially within enclosed spaces experience a thermal microclimate, delaying exposure to cold air while observing the hall. Those without such enclosures rely entirely on body clustering and blankets to retain warmth. The creativity and resourcefulness displayed across households is striking. Historians still debate the universality of these strategies. While wealthier homes could afford multiple layers, structured beds, and heated objects, poorer families relied on improvisation, stacked straw, shared blankets, and careful human positioning. The underlying principle, however, remains consistent: conserve warmth, protect the most vulnerable, and maximize comfort within environmental constraints. You notice that social dynamics subtly dictate thermal arrangements. Larger individuals occupy edges to shield others from drafts. Children nestle in the center. Blankets are shared strategically. Clothing is adjusted incrementally. Even minor gestures, a hand resting on a cold patch or repositioning of a cloak, contribute to collective survival. By now, the hall feels like a living organism, every occupant, human, and animal, playing a role in maintaining warmth. The subtle choreography of motion, layering, and proximity exemplifies centuries of refined adaptation. Survival, comfort, and social cooperation interlace seamlessly. And as mid-morning progresses, you recognize the elegance of these strategies, an ongoing testament to medieval ingenuity sustained through observation, experimentation, and careful cooperation. By late morning, the hall hums with the full rhythm of daily life. The cold has not vanished, but it no longer dominates the space. Residual warmth from bodies, animals, and textiles sustains comfort for those who remain indoors. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval people relied on the layering of insulation, strategic positioning, and incremental heating to extend warmth well into the day, long after the hearth fire burned low. Survival was a combination of planning, adaptation, and subtle improvisation, every action measured against the cold. Historians still debate the extent to which these strategies were standardized versus idiosyncratic. Some records suggest household routines were widely shared across villages and regions, while other evidence points to localized adaptations based on available materials, climate, and social norms. Observing the hall now, you notice both universal principles and individualized methods in motion. A quirky tidbit: in some households, morning tea or warm broth was strategically sipped while still in bed or near the first patches of sunlight. This small act of ingesting heat internally complemented external thermal strategies, allowing the body to conserve energy while increasing comfort. You imagine a cup of lukewarm broth warming fingers and stomach alike, a medieval morning ritual disguised as sustenance. Animals remain integral to the thermal ecosystem. Dogs stretch near embers, cats curl around warm bundles, and livestock shuffles into spaces still radiating human heat. Their movements are instinctive yet crucial, forming a living web of shared warmth. Medieval households seem to have instinctively optimized these relationships, blending utility, comfort, and companionship. Historians still debate whether the primary benefit of animal proximity was physical warmth or psychological reassurance. Likely both, as the presence of familiar creatures mitigated stress and contributed to overall comfort while adding measurable heat. Textiles continue to serve multiple purposes. Layered blankets, cloaks, furs, and hastily arranged scraps create pockets of warmth in strategic locations. Movements are subtle and deliberate, stretching minimal distances, adjusting coverings incrementally, and prioritizing areas most susceptible to cold. The hall's collective warmth is as much social choreography as it is physical insulation. A gentle joke drifts from a neighbor. "I think the dog's stealing my best spot again." Humor punctuates necessity, blending survival with levity and social cohesion. Even the smallest quips reinforce communal bonds and ease the discomfort of cold mornings. Curtains and canopies maintain their microclimates. Those still within fabric enclosures experience a sustained pocket of heat, delaying exposure to ambient cold. Others rely on layered textiles and close human proximity to achieve similar outcomes. Creative solutions from hot stones to heated vessels complement these structural strategies, showcasing the ingenuity embedded in daily life. Historians still debate how these practices varied by class. Wealthier households had access to heavier textiles, structured beds, and heated implements, while poorer homes relied on improvisation, layered cloaks, stacked straw, and strategic human positioning. Despite material differences, the underlying principles heat conservation, resourceful adaptation, and protection of vulnerable individuals remained consistent. You notice how social hierarchy subtly influences thermal distribution. Larger, heavier individuals occupy draft-prone edges. Children and smaller adults nestle in protected cores. Blanket sharing, layering, and incremental clothing adjustments follow intuitive logic, reflecting generations of learned experience. By now, the hall feels alive with coordinated energy. Heat flows, bodies shift, and tasks unfold seamlessly. Survival and comfort are not separate. They are interwoven, each micro-adjustment a testament to centuries of observation, creativity, and communal cooperation. And as late morning sunlight strengthens, you sense the quiet genius of medieval ingenuity, present in every gesture, every layer, and every shared moment of warmth. As midday approaches, the hall has settled into a rhythm that balances activity and lingering warmth. The cold still presses along the walls, but the collective heat of humans, animals, and textiles now dominates, creating pockets of comfort amidst the drafty stone floor. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval people often scheduled the more strenuous tasks of the day during warmer periods or near the hearth, while quieter activities mending, weaving, reading, or resting took place in the cooler corners. This division was as much about conserving heat as it was about efficiency. Historians still debate whether medieval scheduling was deliberately optimized for thermal comfort or whether such patterns arose organically through necessity. Evidence from diaries, letters, and household manuals suggests a mix. Some families observed strict routines, while others adapted ad hoc to available warmth and light. You sense both in action as you watch the ebb and flow of movement through the hall. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some households kept small ceramic or iron hand warmers in pockets or mittens, passed among occupants during chores or communal gatherings. These objects provided brief, targeted warmth, supplementing body heat and residual fire energy. You imagine how comforting a small, heated stone could be to fingers stiffened by cold stone floors or drafty corridors. Animals remain active participants. Dogs patrol sunny patches, cats follow lingering warmth along benches or straw mats, and livestock instinctively gravitates toward human clusters. Their movements form an invisible thermal network, redistributing heat naturally. You notice how humans subtly respond to these shifts, stepping carefully or repositioning animals to maximize warmth without conscious instruction. Historians still debate the balance between utility and comfort in animal cohabitation. While warmth is evident, psychological reassurance and social bonds likely contributed equally to the popularity of sharing sleeping and living spaces with pets and livestock. Your own body continues subtle, practiced adjustments. You stretch minimally, keep core areas insulated, and make micro movements to preserve warmth while engaging with daily tasks. Even small gestures, rotating a blanket, adjusting a sleeve, shifting position, reflect inherited knowledge about how to survive and thrive in frigid environments. A gentle joke circulates, "Careful, you're stealing all the sun from my chair." Humor complements necessity, easing tension and reinforcing social cohesion. Medieval households seem to have relied not only on material strategies but also on playful, low-stakes negotiations for warmth and comfort. Bed curtains and canopies still function as microclimate regulators. Partial openings allow monitoring of the hall while retaining internal warmth, while those without such enclosures rely on layered textiles and proximity to neighbors or heated objects. The improvisation and adaptability in daily life are evident, revealing a sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate environmental conditions for survival. Historians still debate the universality of these practices across regions and social strata. Wealthier households had structured beds, thick textiles, and heated implements, while poorer families innovated with straw layering, cloaks, and human clustering. Yet, the underlying principle, efficient management of heat and protection of vulnerable individuals, remains constant. You notice social dynamics continue to influence thermal management. Larger, heavier individuals occupy draft-prone edges, children and smaller adults cluster in insulated cores, and blankets are shared strategically. Even incremental clothing adjustments follow unspoken rules, reflecting an intimate understanding of both body heat and social hierarchy. By now, the hall feels like a finely tuned ecosystem. Human movement, animal positioning, textiles, and residual warmth converge into a seamless system, allowing daily life to continue despite harsh winter conditions. Survival is achieved not through heroics, but through coordinated, centuries-refined strategies of observation, adaptation, and communal cooperation. And as the day moves toward early afternoon, you perceive the quiet brilliance of medieval ingenuity, alive in every gesture, every shared warmth, and every practical innovation designed to keep life moving comfortably in the cold. Early afternoon settles into the hall with a softer light diffused through frost-lined windows. The cold outside is relentless, but inside, warmth has found pockets of stability. You notice that even seemingly minor movements, shifting a stool, leaning over a table, or adjusting a cloak, affect the distribution of heat. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval households were highly attuned to the thermal dynamics of their spaces. Survival required a constant, almost unconscious negotiation with the environment. People moved deliberately, preserving the heat accumulated overnight while making progress on daily tasks. Historians still debate how consciously people managed these microclimates. Some suggest that rigid routines were taught and reinforced, particularly in wealthier households, while others argue that thermal intelligence was largely instinctual, absorbed through observation from a young age. You observe both patterns in action, a subtle choreography between conscious care and inherited habit. A quirky tidbit: in certain regions, small warming benches were used near hearths or windows. These were simple wooden benches lined with cloth or straw, strategically placed to catch sunlight or residual fire heat, offering short-term relief from drafts. You can imagine someone sliding their legs under a straw-covered bench, savoring a tiny, stolen moment of warmth, an elegant solution to a pervasive problem. Animals continue their silent collaboration. Dogs settle near the warmest spots, cats roam between sunny patches and embers, and livestock instinctively seeks out areas with residual heat from both humans and fire. Their movement subtly shifts the hall's temperature distribution, and humans instinctively adjust, maintaining comfort without conscious discussion. Historians still debate the health risks versus benefits of cohabitating with animals. While there were certainly risks of disease, the practical benefits warmth, alertness, companionship seem to have outweighed the negatives, forming an essential part of domestic life. You notice how textiles continue to serve multiple purposes. Layers of blankets, furs, and cloaks are shifted and readjusted, protecting core areas while allowing mobility for chores. Even scraps of fabric are tactically positioned to patch cold spots. Microclimate management is pervasive. Every movement redistributes heat efficiently. A soft joke drifts. Watch it. Your elbow's stealing my sunbeam again. Humor reinforces both social cohesion and the practical reality of thermal competition, highlighting that survival often required negotiation as much as adaptation. Curtains and canopy beds maintain their protective function. Partial openings allow individuals to observe activity while retaining internal warmth. Those without enclosures improvise with layered textiles or by huddling closer to others. The innovation and resourcefulness are remarkable, reflecting generations of trial and error and observation. Historians still debate whether such practices were region-specific or universal. Wealthier households had heavy fabrics, structured beds, and heated implements, while poorer homes relied on stacking, layering, and human clustering. The underlying principal protection from cold, preservation of energy, and safeguarding vulnerable individuals remains universal. You notice that social hierarchy subtly continues to shape thermal strategy. Heavier individuals occupy edges to buffer drafts, children remain in central warm zones, and blanket sharing is a continuous cooperative process. Even incremental clothing adjustments are executed with care, balancing warmth and flexibility. By now, the hall operates as a living system. Human and animal activity, textiles, fire remnants, and sunlight converge to sustain comfort. Survival is a blend of observation, adaptation, and subtle coordination, not dramatic heroism. Each gesture reflects centuries of learned ingenuity, quietly ensuring that life persists comfortably through the harshest winters. And as early afternoon progresses, you feel the sophistication of medieval strategies in every detail, every movement, every shared warmth, and every carefully positioned textile demonstrating the quiet art of survival in cold seasons. Mid-afternoon arrives, and the hall has settled into a gentle rhythm, punctuated by the soft rustle of fabric, the occasional clink of a tool, and the low hum of conversation. The cold outside remains relentless, but inside, residual warmth and careful strategies continue to provide comfort. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval people relied heavily on cumulative thermal tactics. Layered textiles, body clustering, animal warmth, and lingering fire heat worked together to buffer the chill. These strategies were not random. They were the product of centuries of adaptation and observation. Historians still debate how universal these methods were. While some argue that only wealthier households could afford such layered insulation and structured bedding, evidence from inventories and letters suggests that poorer households developed equally clever improvisations. Straw mattresses, layered cloaks, and strategic human positioning created microclimates that, while less luxurious, were highly effective. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval households incorporated what we might call thermal trickery. People would place warm objects, heated stones, ceramic vessels, or even freshly baked bread near the center of human clusters, then carefully shift them as the warmth dissipated. It's a form of low-tech energy management, creating portable heat sources that could be shared throughout the hall. You can almost feel the gentle warmth spreading from a small, hot vessel as it passes from person to person. Animals remain integral to the thermal ecosystem. Dogs curl near embers, cats roam sunlit patches, and livestock gravitates toward residual warmth radiating from people and hearths. Their subtle movements redistribute heat, and humans adapt instinctively, adjusting positions and blankets to maximize comfort. Cohabitation with animals was therefore both a necessity and an advantage, blending practicality and instinct. Historians still debate the risks versus benefits of close animal-human proximity. While disease and parasites were a concern, The advantages heat, security, and psychological comfort often outweighed the negatives, making animals essential participants in winter survival strategies. Textiles continue to demonstrate their versatility. Layers of blankets, furs, and cloaks are adjusted carefully, providing insulation while allowing for mobility and chore completion. Even scraps of fabric are strategically positioned to patch cold spots. You notice how every movement, every minor adjustment reflects a deep, inherited understanding of thermal management. A soft joke flits across the room. Mind your elbow, my sunbeam is precious. Humor blends seamlessly with necessity, easing social tensions and reinforcing cooperative behavior in shared spaces. Curtains and canopy beds maintain pockets of warmth for those still resting or partially enclosed. Partial openings allow surveillance of activity while preserving microclimates. Those without enclosures rely entirely on layered textiles and body clustering, highlighting the universality of thermal ingenuity. Social dynamics continue to guide warmth distribution. Heavier individuals occupy draft-prone edges, children remain central, and blankets are shifted strategically. Even small clothing adjustments are executed with precision, reflecting centuries of learned practice. By now, the hall feels like a living organism. Human motion, animal presence, textiles, sunlight, and residual fire heat converge into a cohesive, adaptive system. Survival is quiet, subtle, and communal, a daily ballet of observation, adjustment, and cooperation. And as mid-afternoon drifts toward late afternoon, you sense the enduring intelligence embedded in these practices, every gesture, every layer, and every shared warmth quietly celebrating centuries of human ingenuity in cold winters. Late afternoon casts long, pale shadows across the hall, and the cold outside has begun to reclaim its dominance as daylight wanes. Inside, however, warmth persists in pockets residual heat from fires, accumulated human body heat, and animal presence. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval households relied on this layered, distributed thermal system to survive until evening when fires could be stoked again. Every person, animal, and object contributed subtly to a delicate balance that maintained comfort in a drafty, stone-filled environment. Historians still debate how consciously these adaptations were applied versus how much resulted from instinct. Diaries and household records suggest a combination. Some people followed deliberate routines for heating, layering, and clustering, while others seem to act automatically, responding to cold without formal instruction. You observe both at work as shadows lengthen and the hall settles into a quieter rhythm. A quirky tidbit. In some homes, the late afternoon ritual involved moving certain warm objects like residual stones from the hearth or heated vessels closer to sleeping areas to prepare for the evening. These small preemptive adjustments created early microclimates for the night, a clever anticipatory strategy you can almost feel in the way people shift and arrange textiles and objects. Animals continue to participate in this living thermal ecosystem. Cats seek sunny patches still holding light, dogs nestle near humans or embers, and livestock shuffles toward the warmest zones. Their movements redistribute heat subtly and continuously. Medieval people seem to have understood this implicitly, blending utility and companionship. Historians still debate whether the social aspect of warmth body clustering and cooperative positioning was as important as the physical thermal benefits. Anecdotal evidence and observation suggest that community and shared comfort were inseparable from survival strategies. Textiles remain critical. Layers of blankets, furs, and cloaks are repositioned and adjusted for optimal warmth. Even minor gestures, pulling a sleeve down, shifting a cloak over a child, rearranging straw mats, affect the overall thermal landscape. You notice how every micro-adjustment reflects a blend of inherited knowledge, instinct, and careful observation. A soft joke drifts. "Don't hog the sunbeam, it's my throne." Humor continues to smooth social interactions, reminding occupants that shared survival is as much about cooperation and levity as about fire and furs. Curtains and canopy beds retain their protective function. Those still partially enclosed experience microclimates, delaying exposure to the cooler ambient air. Others rely on strategic layering and proximity to humans or animals, demonstrating the universality and adaptability of these techniques. Social hierarchies subtly influence warmth distribution even now. Larger individuals occupy edges to buffer drafts, children remain at insulated cores, and blankets are strategically shifted. Even incremental clothing adjustments are carefully timed, reflecting generations of learned practice in thermal management. By now, the hall operates as a complex, living system. Humans, animals, textiles, residual heat, and sunlight interact seamlessly to sustain warmth and comfort. Survival, comfort, and communal coordination converge in subtle, centuries-refined practices that persist until nightfall. And as evening begins to descend, you feel the quiet sophistication of medieval ingenuity in every movement, every shared warmth, and every carefully positioned textile, practical, social, and elegant strategies for enduring the coldest winters. The light softens further, fading into gentle twilight, and the hall exhales a long, slow calm. You can feel your own body sinking into the comfort of layered blankets, the warmth of nearby companions, and the subtle radiance of dying embers. The day's motions have left a rhythm here, one that hums quietly beneath the stone walls, mingling human breath, animal presence, and the persistent memory of warmth in fabrics and furs. You notice your own muscles loosening, tension softening as the hall prepares for night, and you allow yourself to exhale deeply, letting the cold outside fade into the background. Even the smallest movements now carry a soothing weight. A hand adjusting a blanket, a foot nudging toward a sunlit patch that has long since faded, a whispered joke dissolving into quiet smiles. The knowledge that warmth persists, however ephemeral, however shared, settles deep into your awareness. You realize that survival in these frozen months was never sudden or dramatic. It was a careful, gentle negotiation, a dance performed with precision and patience. Every layer, every micro-adjustment, every communal gesture was a quiet triumph, a testament to ingenuity honed over generations. The animals rest now, curled in their favorite spots, breathing warmth into the spaces between humans, completing the intricate network of comfort that has sustained the hall through the coldest hours. You feel a comforting pulse in the hall, a subtle reminder that even in the bitterest winter, coordinated effort and gentle observation can create moments of ease. As the shadows lengthen and the hall prepares to embrace night fully, you let your mind drift, focusing on warmth, rhythm, and the soft presence of others. Feel the lingering heat in your fingertips, the softness of textiles, the gentle murmur of human and animal breathing. Let your thoughts slow, sink, and float, with the calm that medieval ingenuity has left behind, until the cold and quiet fade, and only ease remains.